Watch out.
They're lining up.
Getting that.
Thank you guys for being here. Appreciate it. I read about you, man. You're all over the place.
This is
And that's what when I hear people say things, I say, you realize we were lucky if we were allowed to sweep the floor.
Yes. Morning.
Great to see you. Jackie, how you doing? Hey, gang, how's it going? Jason, what's going on, buddy?
Thank you.
It's a great day. It's a great day.
Thank you. Great to see you.
Yes, yes.
How are you?
Well, I'm Lieutenant Governor Tim Reynolds. He's a very close friend of Tony.
Thank you.
your step?
Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect's cabinet and cabinet-level designees.
They've asked us to vote, President. These are the steps I was referring to earlier that are just, so there's some votes. Whatever you choose to do, sir. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand as the Armed Forces Color Guard presents our national colors. Ladies and gentlemen, the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter and Mrs. Rosalind Carter. Ladies and gentlemen, the 42nd President of the United States, William Jefferson Clinton, and the Honorable Hillary Rodham Clinton.
We're here for you.
As many as 800,000 people expected here in the U.S. Capitol. They're arriving to watch the swearing in of the 45th President of the United States. The crowd has appeared to be a little bit on the smaller side. This is video from just about an hour ago. The crowd size is far below the nearly 2 million who attended Barack Obama's first inauguration. 1 hour from now, Donald Trump will become the next U.S. president. That's, of course, on the National Mall, but this is the scene that's occurring just literally blocks away from our studios. You see it here. Protesters, lots of them in the streets, smashing windows and running through the street. And Daniel Wrenches was out there watching all of this. He's here on the set with us. We'll keep the video up so you can see what's going on because the police do intervene. But Daniel, give us an idea of what we were watching here. You see the pepper spray there.
Well, Mike, this was a very well-organized protest movement that was moving beyond the perimeter, about 4.5-kilometer perimeter around this National Mall where the inauguration is taking place. They approached that perimeter as an organized group, most of them dressed in black, some of them with gas masks. They obviously realized that they wanted to draw attention to their anti-Trump movement. And in the process, the police were highly organized and started to move them back to the north of the city. But in the process, as you can see there in that video imagery, they started to smash up shops and businesses, Bank of America, Starbucks. It must have been terrifying for those employees inside the building, and now we begin to clean up. But my sense on the street was that this was a very well organized movement. It came before the inauguration, and I don't think this is the end of it, Mike.
No, we're going to probably see protests continuing today. Clearly, we'll see them again tomorrow, a large march planned.
And I just wanted to make the point as well that I think there are probably tens of thousands of other people, both Trump supporters and Trump protesters, who are wanting to come to this event and peacefully demonstrate and see a peaceful handover of power. This was a very well-organized group, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the feelings or the actions of the majority.
All right, Daniel, thanks so much. We have Trump's election, of course, in November sent ripples around the world. In the months that followed, his actions and comments angered longtime U.S. allies. When it comes to China, Trump's comments on everything from politics to trade have drawn pushback from the foreign ministry. We have a team of reporters spread throughout Washington and the world. Sean Caleb's at the U.S. Capitol, where the inauguration will take place. Jim Spellman in the middle of a large protest. That's a short distance from where Trump will be sworn in. Rowie Ruttenberg perched above the parade route. Jessica Stone at the White House. All this for the inauguration of Donald Trump. And we will be with you for the next 3.5 hours, bringing you all the events as they happen. Most importantly, we'll also be analyzing the impact of Trump's presidency on the world. Just before the top of the hour, the next vice president, Mike Pence, will be sworn in. Then Donald Trump will take the oath of office as well. That will be followed by a speech and then a lunch. And the next big event, of course, will be the inaugural parade, followed by a couple of celebratory balls this evening. Let's begin with a round-robin overview of things from every aspect. Let's check in with CGTN Sean Caleb's. Trump will be sworn in right behind you.
Exactly, Mike. They are running a bit behind schedule. I guess promptness has never been a trademark of a massive event like this. We just watched the motorcade carrying U.S. President, for the time being, Barack Obama, as well as President-elect Donald Trump down the avenue behind me, up to the Capitol. I got here about 6 hours ago, and I can tell you at that hour of the morning, still dark out, there were people milling around, a lot of them wearing those trademark red hats that now read, "Make America Great Again," which of course was the trademark of Donald Trump's campaign this past year. Donald Trump has now arrived at the Capitol. They are inside. He and his family will make their way down. They'll be seated, and then one by one, the authorities here will go through the various introductions of Barack Obama, Donald Trump, their families, and then it was supposed to be about 45 minutes from now, the U.S. Supreme Court Justice John Roberts is set to swear in Donald Trump as the 45th president of the United States, and then he will to deliver his address right after that. Jessica Stone, my colleague, has been watching all this at the White House and, of course, covered the White House the last 5 years here for CGTN. And, Jessica, how are things over there?
Well, it is moving day here, as you know, Sean and Mike. It's a 5-hour chance to move the Obamas out, the Trumps in. We do know that Trump has been working on his own speech for the noon hour, and he's been writing it by himself with some advice of his advisors, also talking it out, really practicing it up at Trump Tower. But what's going on behind me right now is a series of traditions, as I said, the move, but also the staff has now given Barack Obama a parting gift, and it was 2 flags, one from 2009 when he took over the presidency, a time that was vastly different, in which we had a global economic crisis and so many other issues facing this nation. And now, 8 years later, the flag that flew above the White House as he now turns over the hands of power of this country to Donald Trump. The move, as I said, still going on, a very interesting and very crazy time behind me. But another tradition, though, is the note. Barack Obama leaving a note full of wise words for Donald Trump on how to handle the next 4 years of his presidency. We don't often get to see the contents of these notes, but we did see George H.W. Bush's note a number of years back, and that said something that has been carried with many presidents, which is your success will be our success. Let's go now to the inaugural parade route with Rowie Ruttenberg. Rowie?
Thanks, Jessica. That's right. We're here above Pennsylvania Avenue. In the last few minutes, we saw the motorcade head east from the White House to the U.S. Capitol, where in the next hour we do expect this inauguration, the oath to begin. Of course, lots of dignitaries in attendance. The parade route is already lined with heavily fortified reinforcements of security. I don't know if you can see it, but there are policemen lined up about every meter or so. Most of the protesters have been pushed back. We have seen dignitaries arrive. Hillary Clinton, of course, with her husband. A very difficult moment for her arriving here down Pennsylvania Avenue at the U.S. Capitol. She, of course, was planning on being here today in a very different role, but she is here as a former First Lady, along with her husband, the former president, and several other former presidents, and we'll be watching the parade go back to the White House this afternoon. Jim Spellman is on the streets with some of the protesters that we're expecting to be seeing here, and he has more for us on the protest movements happening.
Rowie, we're farther along the parade route at a place called Freedom Plaza, very near the newly opened Trump Hotel. This is one of the designated protest sites. I'd say maybe a couple hundred protesters here. Earlier this morning, we were out where we saw maybe 500 to 1,000 protesters at a checkpoint. That way they know that all the Trump people coming into the inauguration will have to see them. They're protesting civil rights, women's rights, and they say they feel energized by the inauguration of Donald Trump. Caught up with some of the Trump supporters who had walked through this protest. They say they're happy to watch these people exercise their First Amendment rights, but they want the focus to be on Donald Trump. Listen.
I think it's part of what makes America great. Even though we don't necessarily agree with their message or what they're saying, you know, we're still Americans, and the only way to make America better is for us to voice our opinions. And so, you know, the message may be different, but I think they have a right to be in the streets, and I'm glad they're out there.
The biggest protest of the weekend is expected to be tomorrow's Women's March on Washington. Authorities expect perhaps 200,000 people for that protest against Donald Trump. Michael, send it back to you in the studio.
All right, Jim, thanks so much for bringing us up to speed on what's happening there. We are lucky to have Eleanor Cliff with us to kind of discuss things. We're looking at some of the images coming from the Capitol. We see Trump's family now arriving. We see the former presidents. This is something we watch every 4 years or every 8 years, this peaceful transfer of power. What do you expect today?
I think there is comfort in watching this ritual. I think it does assure people that despite the differences in policy of the outgoing administration and the incoming administration, that we respect the institution of the presidency and we respect the democracy that we're fortunate enough to live in. I think everybody is anticipating what the new president will say in his inaugural address. He struck just the right notes when he was elected, election night, November 8th. It seems like a long time ago. But since then, he's gotten into a number of Twitter fights, and he can't seem to get over the fact that he's won. He's kind of a sore winner.
Well, I was just going to say, even last night, he was still litigating this race and talking about, you know, people didn't think we could win this thing. Instead of moving forward, turning the page, it seems like.
Yes, recounting the number of electoral votes he got, calling out the big donors who didn't write checks until after they noticed that he won. So I think people are really looking for him to set a different tone, a more magnanimous tone. He is said that he's written the speech himself. That may be true up to a certain degree. I'm sure it does reflect his thoughts, but he has worked with a speechwriter. And one thing to watch, is he going to be speaking from a teleprompter? Will he stick to the script? He hasn't done that during the campaign. But this is a moment that really can set the tone for his presidency. And he's got a lot of objections in the country to overcome. If you live in Washington, you wake up every day and the news is all about Donald Trump. You feel like he's this colossus on the world stage. And then you look and you see that his approval ratings are the lowest of any incoming president since polling began. And in a democracy, public opinion really matters. And so he's got a lot of obstacles to overcome if he wants to be a successful president.
Well, Eleanor, you're going to be with us throughout the morning here in Washington. So we'll talk a little bit more about these peaceful transfers of power, some of the imagery from past transfers. But before we do that, among the countries obviously watching this very closely, China. CGTN's Yong Zhao joining us now from Beijing, a place that's been a target of some of Trump's criticisms.
Well, yes, Mike, China's favorite punching bag of Donald Trump during his campaign to run for the president. He questioned China's monetary policies, accusing it of devaluating its currency. He said those are unfair trade practices that are raping and killing Americans. Shortly after his victory, he said he would label China as the currency manipulator on day one. One reason to label China a currency manipulator is that it will provide grounds to impose 45% tariffs on Chinese production, just as the promised in his campaign. Mr. Trump has also taken a hard line against Beijing's moves in the South China Sea, where he said China has built a massive military complex. It didn't disclose details of his policies of South China Sea, but his comment raised concerns in China. Anyway, Beijing has seen plenty of presidents elected on tough anti-China rhetoric, but Mr. Trump really angered Beijing when he broke with almost 4 decades of diplomatic practice to accept a congratulatory phone call from Taiwan leader Tsai Ing-wen. He also said the U.S. was not necessarily bound by the One China policy, and it could use the topic as a leverage to negotiate deals on other issues. But Beijing considers One China policy as the bottom line. I can tell you there used to be many Chinese internet users support Donald Trump during the campaign, despite his tough stance on China. But when he touched this, they all went silent. They came to realize that Hillary Clinton may have been tough, but was at least a rational diplomat who would respect existing international protocols. Mike?
Well, Yang Zhao, it's just after midnight there in Beijing. Most people likely will be waking up to a new U.S. president. How concerned are they about the relations between these two countries?
Well, Mike, Beijing, people in China knows the U.S.-China relations is complex and cannot be defined with just good and bad. People get used to some of the tough rhetoric on China coming from presidents before, like currency and trade, which are not something new. There's a lot of articles published in China to analyze how possible it is for U.S. to wage a trade war against China. After all, the economic ties is so strong that any setback will not only harm China, but also the United States. But like I said, that phone call with Taiwan's leader is unprecedented. It creates a lot of confusion in Beijing about Trump's China policy. But so far, their response to Trump's highly provocative statements has been measured and restrained. Another thing that makes China concerned is Trump's rejection on globalization, which is not exclusively aimed in China, but will reshape U.S. and the whole world in the coming years. Chinese President Xi Jinping in Davos has labeled protectionism rhetoric as locking oneself in a dark room. This remark has caused alarm in China. Mike?
Yang Zhao joining us there from Beijing with analysis. Thanks so much. Let's go back to some live pictures at the Capitol as we prepare for the swearing-in ceremony. You see the crowd. It's rather thin compared to 8 years ago when Barack Obama took the mantle. They're expecting about half the size there. You see the East Capitol there. Already Donald Trump's family has arrived, so have some of the former presidents. Obviously, one that everyone's keeping an eye on, the 42nd president of the United States, Bill Clinton, because his wife was the candidate who opposed Donald Trump. Many suspected she was going to win. She did not. It was an upset victory. Donald Trump will take the mantle a little bit later on. Sean Caleb's joining us. Sean, give us a sense of well, as we watch, there's Jill Biden and Michelle Obama, the First Lady and the wife of the Vice President entering. This is pretty carefully choreographed how all of this occurs, Sean. Of course, they'll come in first, then, of course, the president. The incoming president will come later. It's all very stage managed before the oath of office is given.
Mike, you're exactly right. If I can pull this out here, I actually have the 2017 timeline. It is down to the minute. I mean, really, it breaks it down. It says Trump children announced and seated. First Lady Michelle Obama and Dr. Jill Biden announced and seated. And those are 2 minutes apart. But as I look at this, I would say that it's running at least 15 to 20 minutes behind schedule. And the reason that is significant, of course, because Donald J. Trump was supposed to receive the oath of office of president at 11:47 a.m. Eastern time, just about 30 minutes from now. So clearly that is going to have to slide as well. But everybody is also going to hang on every word that he says as the newly sworn in president of the United States. Now think about it. What the president says, it can move financial markets, both here and abroad. It also sends a clear message to leaders throughout the world where Trump is going to go, how he's going to stand, how he's going to move forward. And this is significant because mostly what we've heard from Donald Trump since he was elected, 140 characters. He tweets out quite a bit. Now, we do know he has handed over his personal phone, so any tweeting that he will do in the future will probably go through POTUS, the President of the United States. Twitter. Now, there we see Rick Perry, the Energy Secretary, who will be sworn in if he is appointed. I mean, if he goes through the confirmation process, which is going on right now. So much going on behind the scenes. Trump is going to take office. Most of his cabinet will not make it through the nomination process before that. And that is significant as well, Mike. So much going on here behind the scenes, everybody waiting to hear what Trump will say. And interestingly enough, there was also a recent editorial in one of the Chinese newspapers that encouraged Donald Trump to show a sense of responsibility that comes with the power of the new office, and also urging him to take an aura of humility. Something certainly Trump's critics say that he is very short on. His ego is basically legendary throughout the world, and it's going to be interesting to see if he can put that in check as he moves forward, knowing that everything he says is going to be interpreted as U.S. policy moving forward.
Absolutely. A very interesting day. Certainly all of us hanging on every word, as you just suggested, and many people in China would fall into that category. Victor Gao, the messaging on China, very discordant. Peter Navarro, who made this documentary, Death by China, going to be an advisor, but Terry Branstad, a friend of China, is going to be the ambassador to China. He's met with Jack Ma. It seemed like they were positive conversations, but a lot of his rhetoric, very anti-China.
Well, I think the whole world is holding its breath for the transformation of Mr. Donald Trump from president-elect to Mr. Donald Trump, the President of the United States. And the presidency of the United States is very, very important. No one should underestimate the presidency of the United States. Therefore, indeed, I hope Mr. President Donald Trump will give more clear-cut views about peace and development, about how China-U.S. relations need to be developed in the coming 4 years, and will maximize the mutual benefit for both China and the United States, rather than sowing discord between China and the United States, or even disturbing the stable and constructive development of China-U.S. relations. Because otherwise, if China-U.S. relations cannot be promoted properly, if China and the United States cannot get along very well, then I don't think Mr. Donald Trump and the Trump administration will be able to deliver what they promised to deliver, that is to make America great again. To make America great again requires close cooperation between China and the United States. Otherwise, that goal cannot be realistically achieved. Therefore, we hope for the best, that under President Trump, China-U.S. relations can be developed in a more positive and constructive manner. That is our hope, and we are sincere in reaching out to President Donald Trump and his cabinet to develop China-U.S. relations in a more constructive and positive manner.
Victor, it's interesting. We just saw the imagery of the First Lady, Michelle Obama. Right behind her was former President Jimmy Carter. I spoke to him years ago in Atlanta, and he talked about how people who run for president run against China, but once they get into the Oval Office, they work with China. Dr. Henry Kissinger, I saw him speak last week, who said they established a relationship in the Nixon administration with China. Each successive administration has nurtured that relationship. He's hoping for that this time around as well, but Donald Trump doesn't seem to be sending those kind of signals.
Well, indeed, I sincerely hope that the weight and the responsibilities of the White House will have its impact on the shoulders of Mr. Donald Trump. And once he goes into that Oval Office, which will happen momentarily, he will be the President of the United States, and he will know how important China-U.S. relations are and how the Chinese resources can be utilized to help achieve making America great again. That is a worthy goal to perceive, but you cannot achieve that goal without Chinese cooperation. And by alienating China or antagonizing China, the whole world will be a worse place. And America will find itself in more dangerous position if China and the United States become enemies against each other. Therefore, I hope Mr. Donald Trump really will mature up, will size up, will grow up to the heavy responsibilities of the United States president and make sure that the United States will be a force for peace and stability, and China-U.S. relations can be further improved in the coming 4 years, rather than wrecking the close cooperation between China and the United States.
Thank you, Victor, for your observations. A little more than a half hour from right now, Donald Trump will take the oath of office. In the past, the U.S. president simply said, "I do," after the oath was read to him. But that all changed in 1933 when Franklin Roosevelt decided to repeat it.
You, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear. I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
After he takes the oath of office, Trump will deliver a speech. Trump says he wrote the speech by himself with little or no help from his speechwriters. Bar pretty high for inauguration addresses. One of the most memorable in recent history came in 1961 from President John F. Kennedy.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
In Trump's Republican Party, one of the most memorable speeches came in 1981 when Ronald Reagan outlined his philosophy about the role of the federal government. He summed it up this way.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Says government, not the problem. Well, let's take a look at the Capitol right now as we prepare for the inauguration itself. Just moments ago, President Obama and Vice President Biden arriving. They should be coming through the doors shortly. There you see the First Lady in Waiting, Melania Trump. Jessica Stone has been covering the White House for us for about 5 years. She joins us now. What's your take?
Well, I think everybody is really waiting to hear Donald Trump talk about uniting the country after this bruising election in which 2.9 million people did not vote for him. And we do know that he has claimed to basically write this speech on his own. We also know from close aides that he's going to really focus on a thematic speech, his vision for the country, the role of government, not so much a agenda item, even though he's laid that out as recently as in October when he talked about what he wants to do in his first 100 days. But really, a vision for the country, a very personal and sincere message. And what will he say to the people around the world who are looking to this country on issues like trade, on economic cooperation, on climate change? What will his message be for the world? Those are things that we're looking for from him. He's often so off the cuff. How rehearsed will this speech be? How genuine and heartfelt will it be? It's a hard act to follow coming out of Barack Obama's first inauguration speech, 8 years ago, where we were so many years ago as Barack Obama now coming in. And perhaps some of the words in that note were a few tips on how to really reach through the din of the campaign brutality and really reach into people's hearts and living rooms and minds on that National Mall, talking about what's ahead for this country and setting that vision.
Barack Obama, the President of the United States, shaking hands now. Vice President Biden with him as he makes his way down. The final moments of his presidency, winding down. He goes over to talk to the Trump family. This, again, what we see when the passing of the torch occurs, this peaceful transfer of power. Eleanor Clift is with us. It's interesting, though, the last time we saw this, of course, was when President Obama took the oath of office. And when he came through those doors, the first thing he did was lunge to the right and hug a gentleman named Congressman John Lewis, a civil rights icon. He will not be there. A number of members of Congress will not be there. They're boycotting. Talk to me about that. In fact, here's the video now. We'll show it to you. Obama with a big bear hug of John Lewis. You see it. He meant so much to the civil rights movement, meant so much to Barack Obama. He's not there.
John Lewis marched in the 60s. He was beaten. He is a genuine hero in the civil rights movement. And he said that he believes that Donald Trump is not a legitimate president because of the way that Russia interfered in our electoral process and tried to help elect Donald Trump. He said this is the first inauguration that he will have missed since he's been a member of Congress in the 80s. Turned out that he also missed George W. Bush's and used much of the same language saying George W. Bush was not legitimate. So that prompted a Twitter war where the president-elect criticized John Lewis over the weekend of Martin Luther King Jr.'s anniversary birthday. And I think a number of members of Congress feel a solidarity with John Lewis and have stayed away in his honor.
The president, same kind of scenario as what we're seeing with Donald Trump. He used that speech, though, almost instantaneously, the first 30 seconds into the speech, to try and mend this country. Let's listen to what he had to say.
As I begin, I thank President Clinton for his service to our nation. And I thank Vice President Gore for a contest conducted with spirit and ended with grace.
Ended with grace.
Yeah.
We heard kind of that tone when Donald Trump came out to give his victory speech.
That's right.
But as you said, we haven't heard it since. Do you expect him to kind of try and hit those unity notes hard today?
I would hope that he has reviewed some of these past inaugural addresses. He has said that John F. Kennedy is one of his heroes. Now, Kennedy took office in a very different time. I can't imagine that he has not been told that this is the time to sound these notes, and I think he is capable of rising to the occasion. So I think he's going to do the right thing, and the right thing in his mind is to reinforce the fact that he's the winner. So I think we will hear that as well. But reaching out shows that you are bigger than the occasion, or that you can rise to the occasion.
Governor Mike Pence of Indiana making his way down. He will be vice president shortly. He will actually take the oath of office before Donald Trump. We've got Sean Caleb's and Jessica Stone in place. I'd like to get their thoughts as we continue to move towards that moment where both of these men take their oaths and this transfer of power occurs. Sean, why don't we begin with you?
Well, Mike, you've talked about the crowd, of course, is a lot smaller than in recent years when Barack Obama took the oath of office, but it's still hundreds of thousands of people. And as Mike Pence came out, you heard a loud cheer come up, and it really reverberates. As you can see behind me, we're very, very close to what's going on. So it is pretty impressive to watch this unfold, and I'm also struck by looking at this crowd that's gathered at the base of the Capitol. The number of red hats that read "Make America Great Again." Of course, that was Trump's mantra. That's really what he tapped into, the shrinking middle class in the United States, people who've lost good-paying manufacturing jobs, and he's promising to bring these jobs back. The question is, how is he going to do this? He has to now. He's made a big promise. He's really stuck his neck out. If he doesn't do this, he could easily see this base that's behind him turn, and if he loses that, there's already a large percentage of the country that really is against him. I mean, this is a polarized nation right now. If you talk about what people expect to hear Trump address when he gives his speech in less than 45 minutes or so, they want him to say something that is going to unify the country. That's above the economic situation. That's above ISIS, terrorism going on. That's above international relations, strained relations right now between China, between Russia, and the United States. So he has to do something to address this, and if he doesn't, I think a lot of people are going to walk away feeling as though he missed a big chance when he had certainly an audience that wanted to see him do well. Even people who say they didn't support Donald Trump for the presidency, they certainly would like to see the United States move forward together. So they want to find a way to make this happen. You talked about what President George W. Bush said when he took office. People I mean, 17 years ago, that was an ugly election that went on and on and on and on, and then finally ended. And as you mentioned, within a minute, President Bush came out and basically fell on the sword and said, you know, look, let's end this gracefully. Al Gore did that. There you hear the cheer going up. Now as Donald Trump makes his way out to this area.
Obviously, the weight of what's going to happen in just a few minutes probably beginning to sink in. He spent the night last night in Blair House, went to St. John's, the Church of Presidents, earlier today. But as Sean pointed out earlier, he's been kind of running behind schedule much of the morning, which is kind of characteristic, I guess, of these sorts of things. Eleanor, wouldn't you say?
Actually, the transfer of power doesn't occur until noon, and 1 minute after noon he becomes the president. So I think in one sense he's on schedule. You know, another of his signature qualities is everything is great in Trump world. Everything can be done. Everything is easy. We'll just make it happen quickly, and it'll be better than anything we've ever seen.
But the problem here, you've been in Washington a long time, it does not move quickly. It's glacial paced, isn't it?
Absolutely. And replacing Obamacare with something that's cheaper and covers more people, if that were possible, it would have been done a long time ago. So, yeah, reality has a way of intruding. It hasn't yet in his world, but I suspect he may be getting some glimpses of what lies ahead today.
We'll see some speeches and some musical interludes. In fact, right now we're looking at the Missouri Senator Roy Blunt, who's been involved in the inaugural committee. Let's check in with Jessica Stone. Jessica, you've been covering the White House for some time. As you said, the Obamas moving out. It was interesting, President Obama walking outside the White House today. They shouted a question at him. They said, is there anything you want to say to the American people? And he said, thank you. So that's pretty succinct. What are your thoughts?
Well, we also know from that exchange that he is nostalgic, that he's kind of had a day of last times, last time in the Oval Office, last time walking out of the Oval Office. We know that the Obama dogs got a last parade around the house yesterday. So they're saying goodbye in their own ways as well and trying to set the stage for the incoming administration, which is so vastly different from the last 8 years and what Barack Obama has done as president. I mean, this is a president-elect who has promised to disrupt the status quo. And just a metaphor for that might be something that one of his aides wore. Kellyanne Conway, who often speaks on his behalf, is wearing a dress that is very close to what the Revolutionary War uniforms were for the American soldiers at that time, getting freedom from the British. So there is this sense that this is a campaign and a president that wants to upset the past, chart a new way forward, and I think that is some of the themes that we would look for in the speech that's coming up in the next half hour.
And Roy, as we've been talking all morning long, this is a man who enters the Oval Office not just with a split country. His approval ratings very, very low. Talk to us a little bit about those.
That's right. Donald Trump's approval ratings taking office today at about 40%. Compare that to President Obama in 2009, his approval ratings 80%. And so a lot of what we may hear actually be Donald Trump's efforts to validate his election as the next president, to set a better tone of how he intends to go forward. One of the concerns that was raised during the campaign, raised, for example, by Hillary Clinton running against him, was if you can't trust him with the tweet, can you trust him, for example, with the nuclear codes? And we can assume that this morning at Blair House, as has been done with previous presidents, he was given the instructions by top military aides on how to launch a nuclear attack. And now going forward, he will always be followed by a military aide who is carrying a 20-kilo black satchel called the football that has all of the codes should Donald Trump need to launch a nuclear attack. And that, of course, has many people concerned, not just in the U.S., but around the world. We've heard Donald Trump, the candidate, speaking about possible possible nuclear arms race, encouraging other countries perhaps to take up nuclear arms. We heard him say that ISIL could, for example, be a possible target for a nuclear attack. So that has many people concerned, and we'll be listening closely to see how he intends to deliver on those tones. But the numbers, the 40% that I said earlier, probably reflects why the turnout has been low here. Something like 800,000 people expected. That's half of the amount of spectators who turned out for Barack Obama in 2009, and that really is setting a tone, and Donald Trump must be aware of that. Mike?
And in about an hour from right now, the Marine One helicopter will depart. It will take former President Barack Obama off to Air Force Base, Andrews Air Force Base, where he will fly to Palm Springs. That's also a ritual we see. 8 years ago, it was George W. Bush taking the chopper over to Andrews Air Force Base and then flying off to Texas. So we see these traditions as the transfer of power occurs. There's the imagery of an incoming president, the imagery of an outgoing president as well. And speaking of incoming and outgoing, there's a woman sitting up there behind this speaker named Elaine Chao. She is a nominee to become the transportation secretary in Donald Trump's administration. I got a chance to speak with her before the inauguration. I asked her what needs to happen to bring a divided nation together.
You know, you have to have a sense of history. When we're going through times, it seems as if we're the only ones ever to go through something. You know, America's a young democracy. We talk about China, we talk about India, we talk about, other civilizations. We are a very dynamic, young, energetic society. We're only a little bit over 200 years old. So we are also a country where it's very confrontational. It's a democracy, there's robust discussion back and forth. And if you look at our history, even our very short history, there are times when the tonality is pretty tough. I'm not saying I endorse that, not at all. But as we go forward in this era of 24/7 transparent and 24/7 media focus, I think that there is a tendency to stoke partisanship for the viewership or whatever. And I think in many ways, there are many, many instances where people do work together.
I was at an event last week in New York. Henry Kissinger was speaking, and then, of course, he was talking about the relationship between China and the United States. And I know you don't want to go there, but President Xi also talking about globalization. One of the concerns I heard last week when I was at this event in New York is this concern that the United States is going to take this step back. We saw this with Brexit in the UK. Do you think that's overblown, or do you think that that's something people should be concerned about?
I don't think America can forsake its leadership around the world. We are the most economically strong, politically well-respected nation in the world. Whether we want to or not, we are looked upon by many, many other nations around the world for leadership. And so I think it's hard for America to step back. And it's hard for America to not fulfill that leadership role. But how that leadership role is exercised, that takes discretion and wisdom, and we will see.
Elaine Chao talking about a sense of history. It's interesting, in 2001, she was there because she was a nominee for Labor Secretary. She served in the Bush administration for 8 years. Her husband, of course, is the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell. And normally the couples will sit together. Eleanor Clift joining us again. In this case, not the case. Dr. James Chao, her father, will be sitting next to her. He's 90 years old. Of course, he immigrated from China to the United States, has this great story. When she was there before the committee testifying, she honored her father, talked about his struggles to come to this country. She seems like it's one would guess, smooth sailing, but the nominations have kind of hit a road bump. It looks as though a couple may be cleared today. Give us your sense of where these nominations stand with this cabinet.
I think Democrats are unified against several of them, but they're very supportive of several others, including James Mattis to head the Defense Department, and others as well. The Republicans have, if they stick together, they have enough votes to confirm every one of these nominees. But the ethics conflicts, the policy conflicts that several of these nominees have, including the one to lead the EPA, one to lead the Human Health Services, HHS. The new Treasury Secretary has numerous conflicts that in any other administration would have sunk the nominee. But the Democrats gave away their right to filibuster executive appointments under Barack Obama because they couldn't get any appointments through. And now the Republicans have all the tools they need to install every one of these nominees. It's quite remarkable, but if they are installed, they will take office amidst considerable opposition among the interest groups that work with these various departments.
And he made a big pitch to drain the swamp when he was coming to Washington, D.C. A lot of these people,
No.
a lot of these people come from outside government, though. You're not seeing a lot of lawmakers, a lot of the traditional people who kind of understand how the machinery works. I mean, Rex Tillerson comes as an executive, a number of these people as executives. Have you ever seen an administration do anything like this? I remember Jimmy Carter brought his Atlanta gang to town, Burt Lance, some of those. But if you don't understand how this city works, it's pretty difficult to get things done, isn't it?
Mr. Trump said he would drain the swamp, but he basically let in a lot of different alligators because the people he's installing are multi-billionaires, not people you would associate with populism and wanting to, help the working guy. They're a number of military people, and that comes after a campaign where Donald Trump denounced the military, said he knew more than the generals. He's got a couple of generals now in his cabinet. And then thirdly, all of that conversation about how Goldman Sachs was so terrible and Hillary Clinton made speeches for money and Hillary Clinton was Wall Street's puppet, he has installed a number of leading voices from Wall Street and Goldman Sachs. So it's not as though everything Donald Trump says is going to happen. He's a negotiator. Everything is an opening bid. And he has chosen a number of people who disagree with him on almost every policy that he has enunciated. So I think you see some people worried not so much about Donald Trump as president being extreme, but that there could be extreme chaos as they try to get all these people working together and trying to understand the levers of power. As you point out, none of them really have any expertise in government.
I just want to get your thoughts on President Obama's inaugural address 8 years ago. I wrote down a piece from it. He said, "We begin the work of remaking America. We will build the roads and bridges. All this we can do, all this we will do." Some of that passage could be put into Donald Trump's speech today, because Elaine Chao talking about how they're going to do this sort of thing under his administration.
Oh, that is one area where the two parties agree, and President Obama tried to get money for infrastructure building throughout his presidency, and the Republicans said no because they didn't want to add to the deficit. Right now, the Republican Congress is willing to do virtually anything that President Trump asks them to do. But will they authorize money for infrastructure building, or is President Trump talking about loopholes in the tax code to encourage private developers like he has been to build projects? So there's going to be a lot of discussion about how that actually happens.
John, let's talk about that. It's one of the things that the Republicans kind of pride themselves on, is not spending frivolously. And talking to Elaine Chao about that the other day, she said, well, no, we're going to do it all in a smart fashion. Talk to me about his agenda, because he's talked about building a wall, which obviously costs a lot of money, remaking America, rebuilding the infrastructure, that costs a lot of money. And the Republicans have been kind of the spendthrift party.
Yeah, Mike, I'm sorry, I thought that was for Elmer. Yeah, without question, I think that's one of the things that people are having trouble coming to grips with, because if you look, Trump has been all over the map. He said, firstly, some time ago, that he believed that global warming was something dreamed up by China. And then after he won the election, he said he received some briefings. He said, well, maybe there is something to this global warming thing. And then he went on, said other things, and he went back on those statements as well. He has already called China a currency manipulator, said that they're stealing U.S. jobs, and accused China of state-sponsored cyber hacking. None of those things have ever been proven or tied to China with direct facts. And in fact, the outgoing Obama administration has made it clear that they do not think that China is manipulating its currency. So what Trump says one minute and then what he says another is something that's very difficult for people to get their heads around. Now, how he's going to somehow unify the nation and unify his own party, unify his cabinet. And if you look at his cabinet, it's supposed to be reflective of the United States. It's pretty lily white. They have Dr. Ben Carson, of course, but he has nothing to do with medicine. He's going to be housing and urban development if he goes through the approval process. And of course, Elaine Chao, Mike, as you have talked about. So it's going to be a very interesting 100 days. I think Eleanor talked about it. The fact that it really is all over the map and how Trump does move forward.
Yeah, Jessica Stone, that's an interesting observation that Sean just brought up. 18 of the 23 cabinet members, white males. Before we get to you, though, let's listen to Minority Leader Chuck Schumer from New York.
Tumultuous time, a quickly evolving, ever more interconnected world, a rapidly changing economy that benefits too few while leaving too many behind. A fractured media, a politics frequently consumed by rancor. We face threats, foreign and domestic. In such times, faith in our government, our institutions, and even our country can erode. Despite these challenges, I stand here today confident in this great country for one reason: you, the American people. We Americans have always been a forward-looking, problem-solving, optimistic, patriotic, and decent people. Whatever our race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, whether we are immigrant or native-born, whether we live with disabilities or do not, in wealth or in poverty, we are all exceptional in our commonly held yet fierce devotion to our country and in our willingness to sacrifice our time, energy, and even our lives to making it a more perfect union. Today we celebrate one of democracy's core attributes, the peaceful transfer of power. And every day we stand up for core democratic principles enshrined in the Constitution: the rule of law, equal protection for all under law, the freedom of speech, press, religion, the things that make America, America. And we can gain strength from reading our history and listening to the voices of average Americans. They always save us in times of strife. One such American was Major Sullivan Ballou. On July 14, 1861, when the North and South were lining up for their first battle, a time when our country was bitterly divided and faith in the future of our country was at a nadir, Major Ballou of the 2nd Rhode Island Volunteers penned a letter to his wife, Sarah. It is one of the greatest letters in American history. It shows the strength and courage of the average American. Allow me to read some of his words, which echo through the ages. My very dear Sarah, he wrote, the indications are very strong that we shall move in a few days, perhaps tomorrow. If it is necessary that I should fall on the battlefield for my country, I am ready. I have no misgivings about or lack of confidence in the cause in which I am engaged, and my courage does not halt or falter. I know how strongly American civilization now leans upon the triumph of the government, and how great a debt we owe to those who went before us through the blood and suffering of the revolution. And I am willing, perfectly willing, to lay down all my joys in this life to help maintain this government and to pay that debt. Sarah, my love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me to you with the mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence can break. And yet, my love of country comes over me like a strong wind and bears me irresistibly on with all these chains to the battlefield. Sullivan Ballou gave his life on the battlefield a week later at the first battle of Bull Run. It is because Sullivan Ballou and countless others believed in something bigger than themselves and were willing to sacrifice for it that we stand today in the full blessings of liberty in the greatest country on earth. And that spirit lives on in each of us, Americans whose families have been here for generations and those who have just arrived. And I know our best days are yet to come. I urge all Americans to read Ballou's full letter. His words give me solace, strength. I hope they will give you the same. Now, please stand while the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, administers the oath of office to the Vice President of the United States.
Clarence Thomas making his way up, shaking hands with Senator Schumer, and Mike Pence will come forward now and take the oath.
Place your hand on the Bible. Place your hand. Mr. Vice President-elect, would you raise your right hand and repeat after me? I, Michael Richard Pence, do solemnly swear.
I, Michael Richard Pence, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I take this obligation freely,
that I take this obligation freely,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge
the duties of the office on which I'm about to enter.
the duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations. God bless you. God bless you.
The oath administered, Mike Pence hugging his wife Karen, hugging his family members there in attendance as well. Donald Trump clapping behind him, as you see. It's interesting, Justice Clarence Thomas administering the oath. He's one of 8 justices sitting on the Supreme Court. In February of 2016, Antonin Scalia died. President Barack Obama nominated Merrick Garland, and that nomination just sat there. So one of the jobs that Donald Trump will have facing him when he enters the Oval Office is coming up with someone to replace Antonin Scalia. Jessica, talk to us a little bit about that. He's talked about he wants somebody in the mold of Antonin Scalia. Talk to us also about what we can expect from his speech, which comes shortly.
Well, we know that one of his first acts as president within the first 2 weeks, he has promised to name the next Supreme Court justice in the tradition of Antonin Scalia. If you can find a more conservative justice, that could be a little difficult, but it gives you some indication of where he's coming from politically, and it was a big part of why he won the election in terms of the votes that he got. He is going to be working on some other executive orders today along the lines of immigration and trade and some other things he needs to take care of, just procedural matters. But in terms of his speech, speech. Again, I would just go to the fact that I think we'll hear the words America first quite a bit. It's been a drumbeat throughout this campaign as the campaign has moved into government here, and just as recently as yesterday in their first on-camera briefing, we heard that refrain again and again. It's going to shape trade, it's going to shape diplomacy, America first in the economy, America first in energy, it's just a really big rallying cry for this president. You know, he has been the campaign trail. You could really see the efforts to discipline the message coming out of that campaign, and yet the American people do really like him when he is, or at least his supporters really like him when he is sort of off the cuff and genuine, but that can often spell really confusing times for people in this country who do not support him, people that are looking for a consistent message out of this White House around the world. So unity of message is going to be a big factor here. Mike?
Sean, Jessica talking about this speech, obviously when a president gives his inaugural address, he doesn't get into real kind of detailed specifics, but that's been one of the criticisms of Donald Trump throughout the campaign. He really never fleshes things out. Make America great again, drain the swamp, I'm going to build a wall, but never very many specifics. When do we expect to start seeing them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of people wonder if we ever are going to see them. Look, I spent the last 2 weeks traveling around much of the United States, up in Michigan, talking to auto workers as well as Arab Americans who live around Detroit, coal miners in Pennsylvania, factory workers who lost their job, African Americans down in the South who are concerned about the future of this country. One thing everybody talks about, that slogan, Make America Great Again. A lot of people, especially the minorities in the United States, point out, look, America has never been great at one time for all people. So it's really unfair to say that. What they say, it's code for Make America White Again. So how will that come into play in the discussion today? If it will at all, you know, unifying, we expect to be a big part of Trump's speech, Mike.
Sean, we'll stick with you, and I also want to bring Eleanor in on the discussion because we're going to show more live pictures. We're seeing another disturbance, another protest, and this is it. It's not very far, again, from our studios. A peaceful march, looks like about 200 folks there. And really, for those who don't live in Washington, D.C., we've seen a lot of protests since the election. A great many of them, actually, Eleanor, as you know, right after the election. Many of them right around the Trump Hotel, blocking many of the streets in Washington, D.C. They tended to dissipate. You know, it's a long time from November to January, but we are seeing protests today. We're likely to see even more this weekend. We've seen an incident earlier today where some windows were broken, pepper spray used. Talk to me about your sense of what we're going to see. And this is also not uncommon on inaugural day. I mean, going back in time, we've seen this.
We've seen them at particular inaugurations, certainly for George W. Bush. And in fact, I think he writes in his one of his memoirs that when he was driving past the protesters, he couldn't hear their words, but their middle finger sent the message that he got. And Richard Nixon, of course, was the object of demonstrating.
Hold on for just a second. Here's the oath.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
The 21-gun salute, Senator Roy Blunt just about ready to take the stage. He will introduce the new President of the United States.
What a great honor to be able to introduce for the first time ever anywhere the 45th President of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump.
Did I get that one right?
Chief Justice Roberts, President Carter, President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama, fellow Americans, and people of the world, thank you. We, the citizens of America, are now joined in a great national effort to rebuild our country and restore its promise for all of our people. Together, we will determine the course of America and the world for many, many years to come. We will face challenges. We will confront hardships, but we will get the job done. Every 4 years, we gather on these steps to carry out the orderly and peaceful transfer of power. And we are grateful to President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama for their gracious aid throughout this transition. They have been magnificent. Thank you. Today's ceremony, however, has very special meaning, because today we are not merely transferring power from one administration to another or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people. For too long, a small group in our nation's capital has reaped the rewards of government while the people have borne the cost. Washington flourished, but the people did not share in its wealth. Politicians prospered, but the jobs left and the factories closed. The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. That all changes starting right here and right now, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. It belongs to everyone gathered here today and everyone watching all across America. This is your day. This is your celebration. And this, the United States of America, is your country. What truly matters is not which party controls our government, but whether our government is controlled by the people. January 20th, 2017 will be remembered as the day the people became the rulers of this nation again. The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Everyone is listening to you now. You came by the tens of millions to become part of a historic movement, the likes of which the world has never seen before. At the center of this movement is a crucial conviction that a nation exists to serve its citizens. Americans want great schools for their children, safe neighborhoods for their families, and good jobs for themselves. These are just and reasonable demands of righteous people and a righteous public. But for too many of our citizens, a different reality exists. Mothers and children trapped in poverty in our inner cities, rusted out factories scattered like tombstones across the landscape of our nation, an education system flush with cash, but which leaves our young and beautiful students deprived of all knowledge. And the crime, and the gangs, and the drugs that have stolen too many lives and robbed our country of so much unrealized potential. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now. We are one nation, and their pain is our pain. Their dreams are our dreams, and their success will be our success. We share one heart, one home, and one glorious destiny. The oath of office I take today is an oath of allegiance to all Americans. For many decades, we've enriched foreign industry at the expense of American industry, subsidized the armies of other countries while allowing for the very sad depletion of our military. We've defended other nations' borders while refusing to defend our own. And spent trillions and trillions of dollars overseas while America's infrastructure has fallen into disrepair and decay. We've made other countries rich while the wealth, strength, and confidence of our country has dissipated over the horizon. One by one, the factories shuttered and left our shores, with not even a thought about the millions and millions of American workers that were left behind. The wealth of our middle class has been ripped from their homes and then redistributed all across the world. But that is the past, and now we are looking only to the future. We assembled here today are issuing a new decree to be heard in every city, in every foreign capital, and in every hall of power. From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first. Every decision on trade, on taxes, on immigration, on foreign affairs will be made to benefit American workers and American families. We must protect our borders from the ravages of other countries, making our products, stealing our companies, and destroying our jobs. Protection will lead to great prosperity and strength. I will fight for you with every breath in my body, and I will never, ever let you down. America will start winning again, winning like never before. We will bring back our jobs. We will bring back our borders. We will bring back our wealth. And we will bring back our dreams. We will build new roads and highways and bridges and airports and tunnels and railways all across our wonderful nation. We will get our people off of welfare and back to work, rebuilding our country with American hands and American labor. We will follow two simple rules: buy American and hire American. We will seek friendship and goodwill with the nations of the world, but we do so with the understanding that it is the right of all nations to put their own interests first. We do not seek to impose our way of life on anyone, but rather to let it shine as an example. We will shine for everyone to follow. We will reinforce old alliances and form new ones and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. At the bedrock of our politics will be a total allegiance to the United States of America. And through our loyalty to our country, we will rediscover our loyalty to each other. When you open your heart to patriotism, there is no room for prejudice. The Bible tells us how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. We must speak our minds openly, debate our disagreements honestly, but always. When America is united, America is totally unstoppable. There should be no fear. We are protected, and we will always be protected. We will be protected by the great men and women of our military and law enforcement. And most importantly, we will be protected by God. Finally, we must think big and dream even bigger. In America, we understand that a nation is only living as long as it is striving. We will no longer accept politicians who are all talk and no action, constantly complaining but never doing anything about it. The time for empty talk is over. Now arrives the hour of action. Do not allow anyone to tell you that it cannot be done. No challenge can match the heart and fight and spirit of America. We will not fail. Our country will thrive and prosper again. We stand at the birth of a new millennium, ready to unlock the mysteries of space, to free the earth from the miseries of disease, and to harness the energies, industries, and technologies of tomorrow. A new national pride will stir our souls, lift our sights, and heal our divisions. It's time to remember that old wisdom our soldiers will never forget, that whether we are black or brown or white, we all bleed the same red blood of patriots. We all enjoy the same glorious freedoms, and we all salute the same great American flag. And whether a child is born in the urban sprawl of Detroit or the windswept plains of Nebraska, they look up at the same night sky, they fill their heart with the same dreams, and they are infused with the breath of life by the same almighty Creator. So to all Americans in every city, near and far, small and large, from mountain to mountain, from ocean to ocean, hear these words: you will never be ignored again. Your voice, your hopes, and your dreams will define our American destiny. And your courage and goodness and love will forever guide us along the way. Together, we will make America strong again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again. And yes, together, we will make America great again. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you. God bless America.
You can read lips. It looked as though outgoing President Barack Obama said good job. You see Chief Justice John Roberts shaking his hands. He administered the oath of office to Donald Trump, who just gave a fiery inaugural address, hitting on many of the populist themes that he had hit on throughout his campaign. And one of the interesting things he said, this moment is your moment. It belongs to you, talking to the American people. We're transferring power from Washington, D.C., giving it back to you, the people. Sean Caleb's.
Yeah, indeed, Mike. I think anybody who was looking for now the 45th president of the United States, Donald Trump, to issue an olive branch or try to unify the nation, they didn't get that. What they got was a lot of more of the rhetoric that really propelled him to power, reaching out to a lot of disenfranchised workers. Again, that popular theme of trying to find a way to make America great again, rebuild its infrastructure, bring jobs back. I want to touch on a couple of things. Firstly, Mike, it was interesting, I thought, that within the first minute, he did thank outgoing President Barack Obama for what he called his gracious aid in this transfer of power. But then almost instantly talking about how Washington has been a small group of people who have really benefited while the people have borne the cost. But let's take a look at the people in his cabinet he wants to put into position. Many of these people are billionaires. They are the people who have really been reaping the benefits for so long. They are not everyday people. Then he went on to talk about education, how the schools are suffering so much and how they can be great again. But the person he wants to be as Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, has never attended public school. She never sent her children to public school. She is someone who supports vouchers system that would allow children to use money that went through taxpayers to go to private schools. Trump never used China by name, but he did talk about other countries have gotten rich by taking jobs from the United States. One by one, factories continue to shutter and millions of workers are left behind. But many economists, Mike, will, of course, tell you, look, the United States is producing more now than it ever has before. And 90% of the jobs that have been lost, they've been lost to technology, to robots, to computers. So it's very interesting. He talked about the new vision, the land where America will be first. Once again, what people have been talking about, this nationalism, how he is insulating the United States, building walls instead of building bridges to other countries. I think that that is going to get a lot of attention in the coming days as people analyze this short, but as you mentioned, very fiery speech. He went on and on about that message about tapping into the patriotism of the United States, wrapping himself really in the American flag, if you will. It played very well to his audience here on the Capitol grounds, very well to the audience that has supported him throughout, but I don't think it's going to do anything at all to reach to people who wanted to be unified and move forward with this speech.
You know, in many respects, a very dark vision of the United States, talking about inner cities, rusted out factories, schools, as you alluded to, crimes, drugs, even using the two words American carnage. Jim Spellman, this isn't going to go over well with the protesters who are out there. What's been the reaction? What are you seeing out there right now?
So this is a mixed crowd, mostly Trump supporters, but mixed in with this crowd are people who are here to speak out against Donald Trump, and there are smaller bands of protesters working their way through the crowd. So when the swearing in happened here and Donald Trump made his speech, they're playing it on speakers. You could hear cheers and fist pumps from the supporters and a sense almost of resignation, I think, amongst many of the protesters here. They have their signs. They're devoted today to getting out a counter message. They say Donald Trump is racist, that he's against women, that he is dividing the country. So they want to get that message out. Earlier today, at least in small parts of Washington, D.C., these protests turned violent. We know that there were small groups of protesters that were having altercations with police. We know pepper spray was used, and those protesters went on to smash windows of businesses mostly associated with large corporations in the area of downtown Washington, D.C., away from and outside the security perimeters of this. Now, earlier I met with many protesters who were entirely peaceful. They were trying to get out that counter message. We saw them setting up in front of all the security checkpoints. The Trump supporters coming to the inauguration had to go through the protests. They say it's important for them to keep their message going, and they honestly feel invigorated by the inauguration. They feel like they really have a focus now that Donald Trump is the president of the United States. Security has been tight for days leading up to this. Everything has gone fairly smoothly. Far fewer crowds than I think a lot of the people on the security people here in Washington, D.C. were expected. They're preparing for everything from a terrorist attack to someone using a drone or even a cyber attack. But their biggest concern has always been the sheer number of people coming here to Washington, D.C. They're telling us here on the ground that the lower turnout has made it easier for them to make sure that everybody coming here stays safe, Mike.
Well, Jim, let's stick with that because I know you were out there earlier today, and these are ticketed events, and they were even letting some people into the ticketed area who didn't have tickets.
Yeah, myself and my crew, we went through the security procession, which we didn't expect to do because we thought it would take too long, but we were through it in about 5 minutes, and we got to the parade route, and we were surprised to see that though this was an area you were supposed to need a ticket for, that volunteers were rounding up people, anyone who may have been interested, and Secret Service was letting them go into an area that was designed to need tickets for because there was a much lower turnout than they had expected. Certainly, it's a much more subdued scene amongst the protesters, but also amongst Washington, D.C., Mike.
All right, Jim, thanks so much. Let's acknowledgement whatsoever of Hillary Clinton. A quick aside to Barack Obama, very generous to him, but then immediately kind of into this populist message that we've heard so much from him.
And, you know, we know from the exit polls who put Donald Trump in office. It was white voters, largely male, some women, but not educated women. It was veterans, and it was people of faith, especially evangelical white people of faith. He spoke to those constituencies very clearly today. He used words like, the forgotten men and women will be forgotten no more. Some of that is considered to be code for white supremacy. He talked directly to the military, saying, we will build up the U.S. military. And, you know, I don't recall even hearing him mention the vets, which is a big constituency for him in this election. And he also talked to the religious voters of this country, many of whom backed him in overwhelming numbers in the evangelical community, and talked about the grace of God over the country. So these are the sorts of themes that those kind of voters want to hear. You know, it's interesting to me that he really only reached out once to black and brown, as he put it, voters, and said that we all bleed red. There wasn't a tremendous amount of outreach to women, many of whom did not vote for Donald Trump in light of all of the scandals that surrounded him going into this election. And he did not reach out to Hispanic Americans or Muslim Americans who felt particularly targeted by his harsh rhetoric around their communities. And we know that even in the next couple of hours, he's going to take action now to affect their very livelihoods and ways of life in this country. So really, the promise of hearing about unity and the hope for hearing about unity, there was some rhetoric around that, but the message was very clear that the forgotten will not be forgotten anymore. He was talking to those disaffected voters in rural communities who lost their jobs and saying, I'm going to help get your job back.
He ran as an outsider, Jessica, we know that, and he alienated, obviously, a lot of Democrats, but along the way also alienating a lot of Republicans. And it didn't take him long to say that politicians prospered, jobs left, factories closed, against the themes of the regular folks. I'm going to take on Washington establishment, but that's easier said than done, isn't it?
Absolutely. You know, some of the very establishment politicians you could name are in that audience right there, are married to some of his cabinet picks, people who have been in this Congress for over 20 years and haven't done anything else. People like Mitch McConnell, who's the Senate Majority Leader. People on the left, like Senator Schumer, who you just heard from in that speech earlier before the oaths were taken. But there are so many people in this city and in this government that have been here for a long time, and yet he doesn't call them out by name. He calls them out thematically. That's part of a rhetorical strategy that he has, and yet when it comes to really doing the business of government, he's going to have to work with a lot of those establishment Republicans in his own party.
45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, reaching out, shaking the hand of former Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole. And there, Melania Trump also exiting with him. Former President Barack Obama also making his way over to say hello to Senator Bob Dole, and of course his wife, also a former transportation secretary as well. They are in attendance. A very funny senator from Kansas who also ran for president and lost rather badly to Bill Clinton. And speaking of Bill Clinton, he's over there shaking hands as well. Let's check in with Roy Ruttenberg. Of course, the parade, a big part of this whole event, and it looks like a rather thin crowd there as well.
That's right. After the inauguration, there will be a luncheon with members of Congress and select guests, and then the parade route will begin. It's about 2 kilometers from the U.S. Capitol to the White House. But if we can just show you what the route currently looks like. It's a pretty thin crowd. Now, I'll admit, many of these people are actually watching the inauguration from big screens, but you would expect 2 hours before the parade would begin that these crowds would start filling up, and we're not seeing that. We're seeing a lot of security here, spread out about every meter or so. Security from 30,000 security personnel on hand here from 30 state, local, and federal agencies. And that's really a reflection of some of the concern that they have here about security. We will see what Donald Trump does during that parade route. President Jimmy Carter, who was on stage there as well, in attendance of the inauguration, he was the first president who decided to walk from the Capitol to the White House back in the late 1970s, sending a message that he intended to show that he is really less about the pomp and circumstance and more about being a president of the people. And we saw that tradition of being kept up to some extent by some of the other presidents. Barack Obama famously got out of his motorcade against the advice of his security advisors and walked a good distance, I believe about 8 minutes. And we may see Donald Trump and his wife Melania try to do something similar to show themselves reaching out to the people here. That, of course, will happen in the parade route. And then later on in the evening, there will be a number of galas. I believe Donald Trump is scheduled to hold 3 galas. Compare that to the 10 that Barack Obama held when he was inaugurated. Donald Trump said this is a smaller affair. Again, the line that he's been using, so we can get to business right away. Mike?
And we see the crowd starting to thin out as they start to leave. Just moments ago, we saw the 42nd President of the United States, Bill Clinton, and the woman who ran against Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, leaving, and the 43rd President, George W. Bush, leaving as well. Obviously, this is a message not sent just to an American domestic audience. It's a message sent out across the world. And so let's get some reaction from Beijing. Beijing from Victor Gao, who was listening. Victor, what was your sense about his message in terms of foreign policy? Because it's rare that you see a candidate run with foreign policy as a big piece of what they're talking about. Normally, it's the domestic agenda, but he made it a big piece, and again, he talked about it again today.
Well, first of all, the world is holding its breath so that now President-elect Donald Trump is already the president of the United States. And I think the world, including here in China, we need to size up whatever President Donald Trump will say and whatever he will do from now on. And I think his on the U.S. foreign policy is important emphasis. Great. The question is whether to make America great will mean that the world will become smaller. And I hope there will be a positive version of the foreign policy. President Donald Trump will not do havoc to the international security order and will preserve peace and stability, will not scare off other countries. In China, we actually have a lot of concern about what President Donald Trump has talked about, the One China policy, for example, or whether he wants to use the One China policy as a bargaining chip against China. Therefore, I hope President Donald Trump from today will become a responsible president and will care about global peace and stability and will not resort to any whimsical words or deeds which will scare off the whole world. He needs to handle himself in a responsible manner as the President of the United States and nurture peace rather than threaten to use war against other countries.
Victor, it's interesting. He spent last night in Blair House, which is customary. Incoming president spends the night in the guest house of the White House. Ironically, in January of 1979, that's where Deng Xiaoping spent time and when he made that historic visit here to the United States. We've come a long way from that time where it seemed like relations were warming to today, where he talked about we've made other countries rich, it's only going to be America first. All of these kind of America-centric messages kind of indicating that the jobs have gone elsewhere. He's accused China throughout this campaign of stealing jobs. He certainly didn't extend an olive branch, did he?
I think what President Donald Trump just now mentioned is of a great concern to countries like China. And I think he's very one-sided in accusing China of making money from the United States. I think bilateral trade between China and the United States is reaching about $600 billion. China does have a trade surplus, but I think it's up to the United States to really try its best to sell more goods and services to China. We should talk about how to increase China-US trade from $600 billion a year to $1 trillion a year. Therefore, we are talking about adding another $400 billion to China-US trade. The United States, under President Donald Trump, should come up with all the ways and means to sell more goods and services to China to reach eventual balance of trade between China and the United States. People here in China have no problem buying more goods and services from the United States. America does produce good quality goods, reliable goods, which has a huge market in China. And I think we need to have this kind of a each other's throat, as if you selling me more goods, and then you are love Chinese-made goods. And I hope China-US trade can decrease.
As you're speaking, we're now looking at this, again, the transfer of power. Seeing Donald Trump up there at the Barack Obama will, you know, you see Barack Obama was. He was a senator. George Bush being in a position. On rare occasions, you see George Washington, Grant, Eisenhower, to name just a few. It is Robert Hoover, but he was a secretary before. This man, White House, unheard of.
There's always been the notion leading the country, how balanced the belief was always on the list of people. He never did. And I think when we listen to him walk back from, and I think in the business world it may be as president, I do think that his speech was brilliant in its rhetoric, because it really did remain true to all the promises that he made, restore America's business, rebuild America, and that we should think big. The troubling aspect is record in this country. Phrase used in the late 30s or tones of anti-Semitism.
Let me just. And his wife, Karen. Of course, up above, you see Trump and Donald Trump. Again, foregone conclusion that there will be the embraces and then they will kind of go off and sunset. First, Joe Biden and Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, and then, of course, Barack Obama and Michelle Obama will exit, heading towards Marine One. Let's listen in a little bit. Also, while we're at it, let's ask Jessica Stone to join us. Jessica, as we watch this, obviously Joe Biden has to be thinking, what if? He had toyed with the idea of running for president of the United States. He was one of those kind of guys who could sit there and have a beer with a auto worker in Michigan and kind of connect with him. He always had that ability. He decided not to run, and I'm sure as he leaves, he's got to be a little bit crestfallen.
Yeah, and some of my White House colleagues have interviewed him and talked about his reflections on why he didn't run. Of course, that centered largely around his grief for his son, Beau, who died of brain cancer just before he was ready to make the decision, and who on his deathbed asked his father to run for the presidency. But Biden talked about in some of the interviews he gave as he left the White House with journalists that he didn't want to be in the middle of a debate and have a moment of grief and sort of lose his cool because he wasn't through it yet, and that his family really wasn't through it yet either. But he does absolutely know that he could have connected with the very voters that put Donald Trump into office, people from his hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania, a Rust Belt town that has lost thousands and thousands of jobs in the wake of technology coming in and jobs going overseas. He could have connected with those very people. He considers himself one of them. He tries to keep in touch with them. He always talked, even on the campaign trail for Barack Obama and then for Hillary Clinton, about that connection to working Americans. And he's going to also be leaving this city on Amtrak, on the train. And I'm sure so many people on that train, I can tell you, having ridden it myself, those conductors know him. The people that work on that train have known this man for decades, because he's always taken the train back and forth between Washington and his hometown, and he's always kept in touch with his constituents.
So Joe Biden's political career may not be over. Barack Obama, though, will go off into the sunset. A very young man, 55 years old, obviously will stay active. But right now, he makes his way towards Marine One. That chopper will make a very brief flight to Andrews Air Force Base. It's Joint Base Andrews now, I think is what they call it. It used to be Andrews Air Force Base. He shakes hands with President Donald Trump. Pat on the shoulder there, an embrace. Melania Trump saying goodbye to Michelle Obama. Barack Obama kissing Melania Trump as he and his wife will exit Washington, D.C., heading towards Palm Springs today. And again, what's going to happen is shortly they'll go to Statuary Hall in Congress there and have lunch with lawmakers. Right now, again, Barack Obama will make his way to the top and undoubtedly wave goodbye, as he is right now. And shortly, we'll be on that chopper on his way to the Air Force Base. Let's check in with Sean Calebs.
Mike, it's interesting because yesterday we were talking about some of the quirky things that happened during the inauguration. For example, the time that Chief Justice John Roberts left out of word and had to go back in the White House to give Barack Obama the official oath. Well, it's actually the helicopter's not called Marine One unless the president is on it. So now that Barack Obama is no longer president, as you mentioned, it's just the chopper at this point. So it's just one of those quirky little things that kind of floats around. And secondly, I've enjoyed listening to Eleanor all morning, but I really have to take issue with one thing she said when she talked about Trump's speech being brilliant. I think that his critics are going to say the sad thing about this speech, it was predictable. He reached out to his core group of supporters, and he said exactly what they wanted to hear. In terms of unifying the country, there was absolutely nothing. In terms of reaching out to international nations, countries, to find out what kind of leader the 45th president will be, well, you heard a lot of it. He's America first. It's going to be America first every single time when they look at jobs, when they look at employment, when they look at military, all down the road. And we've heard a number of scholars and many people talk about how the United States and China need to develop better relations. Well, there's nothing in this speech that indicates that it would be nothing but an adversarial relationship moving forward. If you think about all the things that Donald Trump has said, his choice for Secretary of State has indicated that he would like to find a way to block China from reaching some of the islands that China has been building up in the South China Sea. And of course, China's made it clear that it will not tolerate that at all. Those are islands that they certainly consider their sovereign territory. So
That's
the fact
right.
the United States would reach in
Sean,
and
let
do
me just
something
interrupt
like
for
that.
just a moment, Sean. Let's watch this imagery. Obviously rich with symbolism, this peaceful transfer of power indicated here as the former president of the United States, the 44th president, Barack Obama, and his wife, Michelle Obama, leave Washington, D.C., and Donald Trump and Mike Pence will have lunch with members of Congress shortly. So, Jessica, talk to us about Barack Obama. What happens next for him?
Well, he's going to go to Palm Springs, California, the site of Sunnylands, where he met with so many Asian leaders at the beginning of last year, and also, of course, famously in 2013 with President Xi Jinping of China. And it's really become a retreat for so many years for presidents during their presidency and afterwards. You know, he's told us that he wants to do a lot of writing once he's out of office, which begins now. And there seems to be a lot of indication that both of the Obamas are going to continue to be engaged in areas where they feel they can put pressure on the U.S. government and on society with respect to issues around race, around religion, and around their heart for some of these young immigrants that Barack Obama's executive orders actually deferred their deportations. We're talking about the 750,000 young Hispanic, largely immigrants that are considered dreamers. He has a real passion for this group of young people and a real passion for the issues around equality and race and religion. And you're just hearing that helicopter go over me now. You probably can't hear me much because we're in the flight path. That is Barack Obama headed for Palm Springs after he goes to the Air Force Base.
And
Mike?
there's Senator John McCain making his way to the luncheon. Interesting, Jess, one other quick note. It's interesting, normally when these presidents fly away, they They jump on the plane. In the case of Bill Clinton, he flew to New York. In the case of George W. Bush, he flew to Texas. They get out of town, they stay out of town. That's not going to be the case with former President Barack Obama. He'll be staying here in Washington.
Right, and you know, it's almost a metaphor, really, for his desire to not take a page, if you will, from the playbook of George W. Bush, who essentially ceded the limelight to Barack Obama upon leaving office, holed up in Crawford, Texas, did a lot of painting. We're going to see Barack Obama be involved in the lives of his kids. He wants to spend a lot of time with his girls. Of course, he still is going to have a high school-age daughter, and they're going to be living not so far, just a couple of miles away from the White House as they finish out her education. And I suspect we will hear from him from time to time when he feels that he can be very beneficial in bringing pressure to bear as the former president of the United States.
And shortly, they'll be all gathering in the rotunda, members of Congress and Donald Trump. I want to get your thoughts on that as well, because he certainly alienated his fair share of members of both parties. I think of Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator John McCain, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, all of them in his own party. He's had some rather strong words for them on the campaign trail. Is there some mending to be done there, or does it really matter to Donald Trump?
I would say no on mattering to Donald Trump. I think what you have seen him do is pull powerful Republicans into his orbit, people like Reince Priebus, who is the head of his party, people like Paul Ryan, the House Speaker, and really lean on them heavily, and also on his vice president, who's going to be the primary liaison between the White House and the U.S. Congress. These are people who have a history with many of the same people that aren't huge fans of Donald Trump, and they will be the people that he will lean on the U.S. Congress, which of course does have a Republican majority. And after 8 years or 6 years of trying to block most of the efforts of Barack Obama in the U.S. Congress, they say that they want to get things done. In fact, just in the last couple of days, Donald Trump joking with Paul Ryan, saying you're going to finally have somebody to sign your bills. You know, they've passed so many bills overturning Obamacare, for example, that just landed on President Barack Obama's desk and never got a signature, making them into law. Well, now there is a party unity on both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue, and so we very well could see more things passed. But that said, you point out to something very critical that we're all going to be watching, which is the infighting within the Republican Party. Lots of schools of thought there on how to do things both internally and externally, diplomatically, how to fight wars. A lot of differences of opinion even on taxes and how to deal with U.S.-China relations and trade. And that's going to be playing out over the next weeks and months as we see them tackle the agenda that the Trump administration has laid out.
Yeah, it's always an interesting city. It's going to get more interesting, I suspect, in the near future. Regal setting there. You're looking at the Capitol Rotunda where the lunch about to be served. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back.
Whether it's about your education, the home you live in, or the items you buy, your money, global business.
Biden and former President Joe Biden making their way to the Amtrak train that they will take to Wilmington, Delaware. That, of course, a big part of his history as a lawmaker. He went back and forth on that train, got to be very well known. Of course, he had a great deal of tragedy in his life, losing his wife and children in a terrible accident, but continued to maintain a career in the House and Senate, and he will be heading back to Wilmington, Delaware, and his future still to be determined. But again, as you can see, smiling as he makes his way to board the train to leave Washington, D.C. He's prepared to leave. And we're prepared to send it over to Elaine Reyes, who's got an update on News Force.
That's right. Some of your top stories. The World Economic Forum is wrapping up with lots of talk about where the global economy stands under a Trump administration. And despite Trump's view on protectionism, Chinese President Xi Jinping stood by the need to resist that rising sentiment. CGTN's Jack Barton has more from Davos.
Elaine, the World Economic Forum wrapped up here in Davos with big picture topics. The head of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, pondered the global economy in the year ahead. Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer tried to calm nerves about Britain's exit from the European Union, reaffirming Prime Minister Theresa May's earlier message to the forum that Brexit does not mean a more isolated Britain, but instead a country freed from the EU's trade rules and seeking bilateral deals across the globe. Again, it was globalization that dominated the agenda, set by China's President Xi Jinping when he addressed the forum about the need to resist rising protectionist sentiment. Xi said while globalization needed to be reformed to address a widening wealth gap, it was still the best driver of prosperity and technological development. Xi also pledged that China would continue to make its markets more open and transparent, which was exactly what the forum wanted to hear. Back to you in Washington, Elaine.
And now to some of our other top stories from around the world. China says its economy grew by 6.7% in 2016. That's the slowest growth in more than 2 years, but still within the target range and high by global standards. A frantic rescue operation is underway at a hotel in China's Hebei province. It was partially buried by a landslide. 3 people have been rescued and several others are still trapped. A glimmer of hope in Italy. Rescue workers have found 6 people alive inside a luxury ski resort buried by an avalanche. 30 people have been trapped inside since Wednesday. Rescue workers were initially delayed because of the remote location of the hotel. When they got to the scene, they found the bodies of 4 people. Helicopters are taking the injured to the hospital. The search continues for more survivors. ISIL militants in Syria have destroyed more monuments in the ancient city of Palmyra. Satellite imagery shows extensive damage to a group of famous pillars at that site and the facade of its Roman theater. Only 4 of the 6 monumental pillars are still standing. The Syrian government lost control of Palmyra in December, marking the 2nd time the militants have taken control. West African leaders are trying to arrange a peaceful transfer of power in Gambia. The presidents of Mauritania and Guinea are in the country for last-ditch talks with Yahya Jammeh. He has refused to turn over power. If the talks fail, he may be forcibly removed by regional troops acting on behalf of his successor. Adama Barrow was sworn in as president at a small ceremony in neighboring Senegal on Thursday. Mexican drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman is now on U.S. soil and preparing to face a federal judge on trafficking charges. He was escorted to New York Thursday under heavy security. Guzman faces 6 indictment charges in the United States, which include murders in Chicago, Miami, and New York. CGTN's John Terrett reports.
Joaquin Guzman is one of the world's most wanted men. He was extradited from Mexico on Thursday evening and brought to court here in New York on Friday morning to hear the charges against him: murder, kidnapping, drug trafficking. His nickname is El Chapo. In English, that means shorty. But at 5 foot 6 inches tall, it doesn't make him any the less formidable. He is the head of Mexico's most violent organized crime gang, the Sinaloa cartel. Guzman is facing multiple charges in multiple jurisdictions across America, alleging that he and his gang brought billions of dollars of drugs into the United States and then laundered the money back home to Mexico. In Mexico, Guzman is a legend, mainly because of his dramatic prison breaks, including one that involved him riding a custom-built motorcycle along tracks through a specially built tunnel. Little chance of a prison break here. Security is extremely tight around the jail where he's being held. His trial is expected to start sometime later this year. John Terrett, CGTN, New York.
And those are some of your world headlines. Time to send it back over to Mike.
All right, Elaine, thanks so much. Let's continue our coverage of this transfer of power here in the United States. Let's take a live look outside right now, and we'll give you an indicator of what's happening at this moment. I believe this is the chopper itself making its way to Joint Air Force Base Andrews, where Barack Obama, the outgoing president of the United States, will board a plane headed for Palm Springs. Jessica Stone, this is going to be a busy day for the new president. He wants to kind of show that he's going to hit the ground running. There's possible cabinet picks who may get confirmed today.
That's right.
He's also talking about perhaps some executive orders. Kind of give us a run through of what we could expect from the new president today.
Well, we've been told by close aides of the now U.S. president that he's going to be signing at least 4 or 5 executive orders. You know, these are things like withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement, an executive order stating that he intends to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement. He is likely to rescind President Barack Obama's delay of deportations of those 750,000 young immigrants. And he's also likely to order by executive order a 90-day cybersecurity review. The papers of those, if he's planning to do that, are likely ready and sitting for him perhaps in the Oval Office, which he has every right to redecorate in the last 5 hours before he comes back here. We do expect him to spend some time at the location behind us at the stand just in front of the White House watching the rest of the parade. He and Melania and their family will be coming down first, followed by the children and all of the other participants, hundreds and hundreds of members of various music groups. But, you know, there's been this open question, Mike, about whether we would have a tweeting president. And that has now been resolved because President Trump has been tweeting for the last 2 or 3 minutes straight on his Trump Twitter feed. Reading some of these are lines from his inaugural address. Today, we are not merely transferring power from one administration to another or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C. and giving it back to you, the American people. You know, you may recall that the Chinese Foreign Ministry in Beijing and many other Chinese leaders sort of cautioned against this idea of a tweeting president, that you can't rule, you can't lead by tweet. Well, it appears that President Trump is continuing a tradition he started along the campaign trail, and even in interviews said he credited for his connection to the American people, using Twitter on his own, not using the POTUS handle. He actually has more followers on his own personal handle. So it remains to be seen how long he'll be using this, but I wouldn't guess he's going to hang up the Twitter just yet.
Well, it certainly doesn't look that way. Jessica Stone reporting live overlooking the White House, who has a new occupant today, President Donald Trump. We're going to take a short, we'll lead off a new hour of coverage right about now. All right, we're looking again. This is the Capitol Rotunda. This is going to be a big gathering of lawmakers. They will meet and have lunch with the new president of the United States, the new vice president, President Donald Trump, and Vice President Pence. And here is the chopper. Again, the outgoing president, Barack Obama, will exit that and board a plane and head for Palm Springs. So he'll be leaving, a new administration beginning, as Jessica Stone was pointing out. And we are expecting Donald Trump to have some executive orders today. That is exactly what Barack Obama did when he entered office as well. It's customary to try and at least give an indication that you're hitting the ground running and getting some things done. And so here we see Barack Obama exiting with his wife, Michelle Obama. One final salute as he leaves town with his wife, heading to Palm Springs. A much smaller crowd here versus the Capitol Hill crowd waiting and talking to the new president of the United States, the 45th president, Donald Trump. Sean, it's interesting, you know, Jessica Stone was talking about the tweets. We were kind of expecting perhaps they'd stop. They have not. And you and I were talking about this. This becomes a bit of a problem once he becomes president of the United States, because this can be seen as policy, right?
Without question. I know for a fact that people within the State Department have wondered, once, well, now that he is president and Donald Trump tweets, is that policy? Will these 140 characters be treated as policy? It's something that really nobody has ever had to discuss before. Certainly, it's something that that they're going to have to look at and see how Donald Trump moves forward. You know, also going back to his speech too, Mike, I want to talk just a bit about that as the crowd trickles out behind me. It's amazing, firstly, how fast Capitol Hill can clear out, especially on a cold, somewhat rainy day. But there was a lot of speculation with the pictures that Trump released of him actually writing his speech. Would he be the one who actually crafted this speech? It was certainly fiery. He certainly reached out to his core supporters, and I don't think anybody would have any trouble believing that he was the one that wrote this. It certainly tracked along the kind of lines that really led him to power, the kind of things that really first intrigued voters not only here but across the world, really, that somebody who is an outsider, somebody who has success in business, somebody who has been able to make things happen. Well, the question is he going to be able to rein in his ego, and is he going to be able to work with other people? Listening to what he said, it was certainly a lot of isolationism. You know, we live in a global society now. So much of what goes on anywhere, any corner of the earth, has a ripple effect. And simply by wanting to kind of close ranks and bring jobs back and all decisions made with America first, I think a lot of people, Mike, are going to be wondering if that's the best way to move forward. I'd love to be a fly on the wall inside Sanctuary Hall right now, where we see these pictures where everybody's getting ready to have their luncheon. And then a bit later on, of course, the parade that will go from here down towards 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the White House. And I think that we've also all read those articles where apparently Donald Trump wanted to have tanks and missile launchers within that parade, but the military kind of piped up and said, you know, these tanks can weigh as much as 45,000 kilos. Washington was built on a swamp. Probably not a great idea to have something that monstrous going down the avenues, the thoroughfares here in this city. But again, it just speaks to what kind of person Trump is, what kind of image he wants to portray.
Well, he came from television. It's quite a production is one of the things we see quite a bit with him.
And some reality show that we're all living in right now.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting the next 4 years.
Yeah, it clearly will be. And right now, again, we're watching the back and forth, the incoming administration, seeing images of that, the outgoing administration. Just moments ago, we saw the hangar out at Andrews, where obviously a lot of staffers, friends of the outgoing president gathering there to wish him goodbye. It's been a tough week for a lot of them, clearing out their offices, leaving the White House. As we know, here in Washington, D.C., nobody works an 8-hour day. Whether you're on Capitol Hill or the White House, whether you're Republican or Democrat, these people put in long, long hours. President Barack Obama, former President Barack Obama, he and the United States moved with China to set some new climate change policies. And of course, we saw that in Paris. There have been areas of disagreement between the United States and China, but this is one area where both China and the United States have come together and actually propelled the rest of the world. One of these areas, and I'm going to bring in Han Pong, who's with us here. One of these areas, of course, is basically putting in caps on carbon emissions. We've got a new administration. Can he go backwards? I mean, what are we going to see? Because we clearly have no real idea of what kind of policy we're going to see in this regard.
Well, actually, it's very hard to predict. But actually, if you look at the Trump's rhetorics before and after his election campaign, it's very interesting that there are a lot of inconsistency in his remarks on climate change. You know, before he was elected as the president, he was campaigning a lot, and he said that climate change is a hoax invented by the Chinese in order to reduce the competitiveness of the U.S. Manufacturing industry. But after he was elected, I think it should be in late November, he said that there is some sort of connectivity between the human activities and climate change. So it seems that he's changing a little bit. But of course, today he's just been sworn in, and we're still not quite sure what he's going to do in his, when he's really in the Oval Office.
So you traveled over here from Beijing, you got here, and were able to watch this from this vantage point, Washington, D.C. Your thoughts as you were watching the speech, because a lot of people who were in that audience, Americans, loving this America First kind of rhetoric. But as someone from another country, how was this viewed?
Well, for me, it sounds like a big change in U.S. policy. In the past, the U.S. would talk a lot about globalization. And
let me just interrupt for just a second, because I believe outgoing President Barack Obama will probably make his way up to the microphone and deliver some remarks for an adoring crowd there as they cheer. Let's listen in. You hear the familiar chant, "Yes, we can." This will be rather unusual, seeing Barack Obama standing at a podium that doesn't have the seal of the White House there, but he is the former president of the United States now. Han Peng, as you watch this, I mean, this transfer of power, it's unique here in the United States. So it was something that people talk about in this country quite a bit. You see one foreign policy for 8 years, and then this dramatic shift to a different sort of foreign policy. We saw it with George Bush to Barack Obama. Now we'll see it with Donald Trump. It's kind of this whipsaw approach, and it has to be interesting to see it from another country. You just really don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah, actually, the idea of globalization was actually started from the West, and then ironically, at the moment, it's now under the threat of major Western powers. We see Brexit in the UK. We also see Donald Trump taking power, and he's saying a lot of things like America first, all these American-centric policies. And he also said that in his inauguration speech, that some other countries are that the United States globalization policy is only making some other countries rich. He didn't mention which country it is, but of course, I think he really means China. And that's causing a lot of concern inside China, because China really needs the global market to sell its products. And also, there is also concern in China that because of this economic slowdown across the world, a more fragmented market in the world would further weaken the economic recovery.
It's really interesting to watch what we've seen in just the last week or so in terms of major speeches. The World Economic Forum, President Xi Jinping addressing that crowd, talking about globalization, a lot of the themes that you are used to hearing from the United States. Let's listen in to outgoing President Barack Obama as he talks to this crowd.
Michelle and I, we've really been milking this goodbye thing. So it behooves me to be very brief. Yes. I said before, and I will say again, that when we started on this journey, we did so with an abiding faith in the American people and their ability, our ability, to join together and change the country in ways that would make life better for our kids and our grandkids. The change didn't happen from the top down, but it happened from the bottom up. It was met sometimes with skepticism and doubt. Some folks didn't think we could pull it off. There were those who felt that the institutions of power and privilege in this country were too deeply entrenched. And yet, all of you came together in small towns and big cities, a whole bunch of you really young, and you decided to believe. And you knocked on doors and you made phone calls, and you talked to your parents who didn't know how to pronounce Barack Obama. And you got to know each other, and you went into communities that maybe you'd never even thought about visiting, and met people that on the surface seemed completely different than you, didn't look like you or talk like you or watch the same TV programs as you, and yet once you started talking to them, it turned out that you had something in common. And it grew, and it built. And people took notice. And throughout, it was infused with a sense of hope. And as I said in 2004, it wasn't blind optimism that drove you to do all this work. It wasn't naivete. It wasn't willful ignorance to all the challenges that America faces. It was hope in the face of difficulty, hope in the face of uncertainty. You proved the power of hope. And throughout this process, Michelle and I, we've just been your front men and women. We have been the face, sometimes the voice, out front on the TV screen or in front of the microphone, but this has never been about us. It has always been about you. And all the amazing things that happened over these last 10 years are really just a testament to you. In the same way that when we talk about our amazing military and our men and women in uniform, the military is not a thing. It's a group of committed patriots willing to sacrifice everything on our behalf. It works only because of the people in it. As cool as the hardware is, and we got cool hardware, as cool as the machines and weapons and satellites are, ultimately it comes down to remarkable people. Some of them a lot closer to Malia's age than mine or Michelle's. Well, the same thing's true for our democracy. Our democracy is not the buildings. It's not the monuments. It's you being willing to work to make things better and being willing to listen to each other and argue with each other and come together and knock on doors and make phone calls and treat people with respect. And that doesn't end. This is just a little pit stop. This is not a period, this is a comma in the continuing story of building America. So to all of you that have put your heart and soul not just into our campaigns, but into making schools better, making sure our veterans got the care they needed, making sure that we left behind a planet that is safe and secure for our kids, making sure that hardworking people had a ladder of opportunity and could support families. For all of you who have just done amazing, remarkable work, most of it unheralded, most of it without fanfare, most of it without you getting any word of thanks, we could not be prouder of you. I could not be prouder of you. This has been the privilege of my life, and I know I speak for Michelle as well. And we look forward to continuing this journey with all of you. And I can't wait to see what you do next. And I promise you I'll be right there with you. All right? God bless you. Thank you, everybody. Yes, we did. Yes, we can.
Farewell remarks there from outgoing President Barack Obama, speaking to a thunderous crowd, a very adoring crowd, one would say, there at Joint Base Andrews. A lot of staffers there to say goodbye to the outgoing president. As he does that, the incoming president, now with pen in hand, signing the nominating papers for his cabinet members. This is a ritual. You'll see him go through a lot of pens because the nominees themselves will want to have that for their own historical preservation. And of course, members of Congress also want it. And you see the Speaker, Paul Ryan, patting Nancy Pelosi on the back. She got one of the pens there. So this is a ritual that we also see every time a new president comes in. And of course, he's hoping to see some of those nominations get confirmed today. General Mattis, who would take over as the Defense Secretary, likely to be confirmed today. Also, the Homeland Secretary, General Kelly, also expected to be confirmed today as well. But some brief back and forth. Let's listen in.
That's good. Good idea. Come on.
You get a prize back.
That's a good idea. You got a prize back. I'll take them. Yes, of course, that would be very good. I'll take them. Put them back, Pencil. Rick Perry. This is, you did very well yesterday. Rick Perry.
Yes, look, Chuck is torn.
It's better than Carson.
A little back and forth joking there. Jessica, let's talk about some of these cabinet nominees. Let's start with Rex Tillerson, because obviously he's going to have an impact on the world stage if he's confirmed. Talk to us about him and his confirmation, hearing a lot of people saying he didn't handle himself as well as one would have hoped.
That's right, and a lot of these candidates actually, the sort of conventional wisdom is that some of them were not as prepared as they needed to be to take questions, specifically the people in the business community, about how their past either relationships or financial transactions can now affect their ability to lead on behalf of the American people and not on behalf of financial interests. But let's take a closer look at Rex Tillerson. As you may have heard, he's been 41 years at ExxonMobil. He started at the lower end of the spectrum and rose through the ranks to become its CEO and chairman. But part of the controversy around him among the American people is that he called Russian acts troubling, but he's also been very close to Vladimir Putin, in fact, getting an award from him just after reaching a major oil deal with Rosneft, the state-run oil company. Also providing some divisions between him and the president-elect. He says he's against the Muslim registry that was proposed on the campaign trail, promising also to block China's access to the South China Sea Islands, something that raised the ire in Beijing, Let's take a look now for Steven Mnuchin. He is the Treasury Secretary designee. He was just on the Hill yesterday during his hearings. He, too, got a lot of really direct and tough questions about his financial transactions. At one point, senators calling him the foreclosure king because of his links to agencies that presided over foreclosures, and I watched a portion of that, and there was a real lack of familiarity with some of the duties that are going to be his if he's confirmed, Mike. But let's take you through his past. He's a former hedge fund manager. There were, as I said, along his confirmation process, complaints about foreclosure practices. He was criticized for having offshore bank accounts, and he does want tax code reform. Although I will say, in hearing his testimony, Mike, he seems to be, again, separating himself from the president of the United States, Donald Trump, on some things having to do with taxes. He said it was more important to grow exports than to limit imports, and that's something that President Trump has not said on the campaign trail, offering those 45% tariffs against Chinese goods in particular. Another controversial nominee of this president, also Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, one of the longest, if not the longest running governors of that state, a major energy state. He is nominated for the energy secretary position. He's the former governor of Texas. He wanted to eliminate the energy department on the campaign trail when he ran 4 years ago, and that was really kind of ironic to see him nominated now for this post. He is against the Iran nuclear deal. That keeps him right in the same lane with Donald Trump, and he has pledged to protect all science. Of course, the Energy Department has a lot to do with climate change policy, with energy policy and oil drilling, and so he's going to be in the hot seat on that subject, you can be sure, if confirmed. Lastly, another person of note, James Mattis, also called Mad Dog Mattis. He's a former U.S. Marine general. He's the nominee for Secretary of Defense. He has taken a position against torture and waterboarding, and that at times could be construed as different from Donald Trump, who said he supported torture early on the campaign. He calls Iran an enduring threat and, in fact, ran up repeatedly against people in the Obama administration because of that sentiment during the course of them negotiating the Iran nuclear deal. And he also has been on record as saying he sees China as a military challenge. In fact, Mike, he has called for much more strength in the U.S. Navy and much more personnel in the Asia Pacific as a counter, he would say, to China's rise.
And he's the likeliest to actually get confirmation today, perhaps.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed, yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Jessica, for that update. Of course, this is an event that is being watched around the world. We were just talking to Han Pan and the reaction from China, but clearly another country that has its eyes on all of this is Mexico, because Donald Trump made Mexico a big part of his campaign, saying we're going to build a wall. Then, of course, making a trip to Mexico and meeting with the president there. Let's check in with Frank Contreras, who's in Mexico City, kind of get his thoughts at this point.
Hi, Mike. Thanks. Yes, Mexico is watching this very, very closely, the transition of power that has just taken place in the United States. Governors and the president here and pretty much every level of government that you can imagine, even at the local level, know that Donald Trump mentioned Mexico on a number of occasions. And one of the specific things he said during the campaign was that Donald Trump plans to deport some 3 million people. Many of them will be undocumented immigrants who are Mexican citizens inside the United States now. By comparison, Mike, during the years of the Barack Obama administrations, the two administrations, Obama deported some 2.8 million people, and there were many activists on both sides of the border who called Obama the deporter-in-chief. So the numbers are really pretty much on par with each other. We wanted to take a look here to see during these years that the deportations have been taking place, has Mexico actually been ready to receive the immigrants? So we traveled to a town nearby, and CGTN looked into whether Mexico is ready to receive large numbers of returning migrants.
Beto Ortiz migrated to the United States on 3 different occasions. He was deported at least once, and last October, he voluntarily decided to return to Mexico. Ortiz now lives in a rural village where he owns a peach orchard. He says the infrastructure here is poor and jobs are scarce.
It's really bad. The roadways here are filled with potholes. The health clinics lack doctors and nurses, and the schools are not great. They're supposedly government-run, but we citizens are the ones who keep them going.
CGTN talked with school teachers in this town who say they now attend to an increasing number of children whose parents are immigrants. Many of the students speak only English, and rural schools like this are not prepared to teach them. Dr. Nancy Rueda takes me to see the local health clinic. She's been working here for nearly 5 months. Dr. Rueda says she sees more than 30 patients a day. 60% of them are former migrants. Most have no medical insurance to pay for checkups. Dr. Rueda says the clinic urgently needs another doctor and more medicine.
It might look filled, but there are many medications we are lacking, mainly those for chronic patients with diabetes and hypertension.
With more former migrants returning to Mexico, the same problems, including a lack of good-paying jobs, are being repeated throughout the country.
In towns like this across Mexico, it's difficult to find decent paying work. But in his case, it's remittances from migrants in the United States that pay his salary.
The incoming Trump administration plans to deport even more migrants, and immigration professor Norma Baca says Mexico is not prepared for them.
Mexico is not ready at all. We have not begun to even visualize or orient ourselves to this new phase, this forthcoming scenario of international migration.
Returning migrants like Beto Ortiz, who have some land or business, can at least struggle to make a go of it. But experts say hundreds of thousands of other migrants will probably not be as fortunate.
Frank, as Mexico prepares for that potential reality, the government is looking to bridge ties with the U.S. The new Mexican foreign minister planning a visit with a new American president. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, a top delegation of Mexican officials, Mike, will be traveling to Washington next week to meet with some of Mr. Trump's top aides, including Jared Kushner, his son-in-law. They'll be talking about the key issues that bind this bilateral relationship. Of course, the politics, the bilateral relations themselves. There'll be issues of security on the table as well as trade. That, of course, is a major issue because Mr. Trump has emphasized repeatedly that Mexico is taking jobs under the North American Free Trade Agreement. So we're going to see the former trade minister, the former Treasury minister, now the foreign relations minister, meeting with Mr. Kushner in Washington to discuss these issues. And also, of course, immigration will be on the table as well, as Mexico does its best to try to build a strong relationship with the new administration there in Washington, Mike.
All right, Frank, thanks so much for that update from Mexico City. Let's take another live look at what's happening right now. This again, President Obama doing a fist bump there with a little boy, giving hugs to a lot of his admirers and staffers as he says goodbye. And then, of course, National Security Advisor there, Rice, hugging him just moments ago. We're seeing a lot of tearful goodbyes from President Obama and a cheery time over at the Capitol as President Trump signs the nominating papers. We were just showing you that a moment ago. So President Trump ensconced there at the Capitol, getting ready for a lunch with members of Congress as outgoing President Barack Obama says goodbye to all of his close aides and friends as he prepares to fly off to Palm Springs. Well, the World Economic Forum, of course, is wrapping up with lots of talk about where the global economy goes. And of course, that is where the President Xi Jinping was speaking, and he was talking about globalization, and a lot of the themes that we were hearing from him were the type of themes you would hear from a U.S. president. Not so. The president today clearly stating America first, America, America, America. Let's bring in Victor Gao. Talk to me about this contrast that we saw this week. It's really striking to see President Xi Jinping with all of these themes in Davos, and then President Trump with these themes today here in Washington, D.C.
Yes, indeed. The contrast between what President Xi Jinping of China has been talking about in Davos, as well as at the United Nations headquarters in Switzerland, in Geneva, and what President Trump has been talking about over the past several months, but also in his inauguration speech today, the contrast cannot be sharper. And I think these two leaders represent two very, very different perceptions of the world and their philosophical positioning of the world and how to describe globalization. I think President Xi Jinping has the better argument because he has been talking about the pros and cons of globalization, but globalization is irreversible, is inevitable, and all the countries in the world need to find ways to adapt to globalization and seize the moments and come up with their own competitive edge, rather than blaming globalization as if it is the reason for all their own failures. Whereas if we listen very carefully to what President Trump has to say, he's blaming globalization, he's putting America first, as if you can really maximize the benefit for the United States at the cost of all the other countries. Building a wall separating Mexico away from the United States will be a disaster for Mexico, but eventually it's also coming back to haunt the United States. And I think the world community need to really have better guidance as to what the United States will do in the coming 4 years. And if the United States decides to abandon globalization and abandon free trade and abandon market economy, then other countries will have to move forward to fill the void. And I think President Xi Jinping of China has been talking in the right way. He's applying a very steady hand to the difficult situation in the international community involving global economic development. And I hope other countries will see the difference, and eventually, hopefully, the United States under President Trump and China under President Xi Jinping will find better ways to engage with each other and cooperate with each other rather than getting at each other's throats, because otherwise the world will be a worse place if the United States and China cannot see eye to eye on these major issues, including globalization and climate change.
Well, Victor, you know what's interesting, this peaceful transfer of power, we see it oftentimes every 8 years. I went back and looked at the inauguration 8 years ago, and there in the front row was Malia with a camera taking pictures. Today, you just wouldn't see that. People bring their cell phones, they take pictures. That isn't anyone stealing jobs, that's technological advances. And we're seeing this. We're seeing with robotics. We're seeing technology where jobs are lost. And you hear this other counter argument that perhaps what's needed is retraining, but that's not what you're hearing from Donald Trump.
Yes, indeed. President Trump seems to blame the losses of jobs in the United States on globalization and on China's trade with the United States. The reality is much more complicated. The technological breakthroughs are actually a major reason for laying more people off and creating redundancies. However, I think we need to be objective about the technological changes. while we need to be fully aware of the downside of the technological changes, we need to be very much focusing on the upside that the technological changes will create and the greater productivity it will generate. Therefore, I think rather than blaming others as if you do not need to catch up with the megatrends in the world and the innovation needs that you need to make, and blaming all the other countries, including blaming China. I think President Donald Trump can do the United States and the American people a big favor by really urging the people in the United States not to be complacent and try to be more innovative and try to engage the rest of the world rather than treating the United States as if a separated island having nothing to do with the rest of the world. We need to be more objective in our analysis of the real problems in the United States, and we need to really have better ways, creating win-win situations so that the American people eventually will better off, and all the other countries and people in other countries can also be better off with a stronger United States.
Victor Gao, thanks so much for your analysis. We've got Saurabh Gupta here on the set to continue the conversation with us. I want to kind of stick with that theme. You know, it was a day when we took pictures. We took the film and we got it developed. There were people doing all these jobs. We were buying film. Those days are over. Technology continues to race forward. Make America great again means kind of taking a step back when you listen to Donald Trump.
Yes.
There's no turning back, is there?
No, there is no turning back. And the real fear is that Mr. Trump is misdiagnosing the problem, or at least misdiagnosing in what he can sell to his own, to the base that elected him into power. He has, and they have to come to terms with the new and changed world, and that trade and protectionism and anti-immigrant sentiment is just not going to cut it. It's not going to provide the solutions. They instead need to upskill. They need to move out perhaps from their towns. It's a wrenching decision, but they need to perhaps go to bigger cities, find new jobs, retrain themselves, and do different jobs. And I think he might just arrest that process for us a few years in the hope that protectionism is going to provide that magic bullet, which it will not.
Barack Obama preparing to leave now for Palm Springs. We just saw him enter the plane there. He's talking about 45% tariffs. I mean, these are some of the things he's thrown around. Give me the lay of the land internationally. What does that do? Obviously, there's a vacuum created when the United States takes a step back and starts slapping everyone. People go elsewhere. You see China basically with open arms saying, you know, especially with the Belt and Road Initiative, the AIIB, they're out there. If the U.S. goes in the other direction, I mean, talk to us about the playing field. What does it look like?
The days when you could slap those sort of tariffs, which were back then in the 1980s and 1970s, when they did have some measure of success, those days are over. It's over because countries have since moved into the World Trade Organization, and there are rules and disciplines by which you can do that. You know, President Reagan could slap those tariffs on Japan and try to modify their behavior, but we need to be very clear about one thing. For 30 years, tariffs were slapped on Japan and they were pressured. That trade deficit with Japan never got erased in spite of that. And it's not going to get erased with China or with Asia. But the important point is this, which I'd like to point out, and that is with regard to, it was the Americans who had created this Asian operating system of light manufacturing exports, which were provided low tariff entry into the United States on the basis of which the United States got very, I'm sorry.
Just hold on for just a second. Yeah. We want to watch a little of this as President Donald Trump enters with First Lady Melania Trump. There he was just a moment ago, greeting former President Bill Clinton. Rowie, give us a sense of the day ahead. The parade will happen a little later. Crowds still thin, or are they starting to build?
Well, the crowds here are starting to build behind me, the parade a bit more than an hour away, and we've seen people after the inauguration, the swearing-in ceremony, the oath, coming out here and starting to line the streets, people chanting Trump, 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 holding up their signs, some protesters holding up signs, references, words we won't use, references to Donald Trump, obviously critics of the incoming president, as we see him there in those images having lunch now at the U.S. Capitol with members of Congress. Not all of them, we should note. Dozens of Democratic lawmakers have boycotted the inauguration. And interestingly enough, earlier we saw Nancy Pelosi standing to his left when he was signing those executive orders. She, of course, a Democratic House leader. Earlier in the day, at the actual swearing in, she was wearing a coat along with other Democratic lawmakers that had a button on it. I don't know if you saw the image, but it said very closely, "Protect our care," a hashtag that they're using. Let's listen into what's happening now at the lunch.
Grand Hall, the National Statuary Hall, which served until 1857 as the chamber of the House of Representatives. The statues that line the walls of this room are placed throughout the Capitol, and they recognize important figures in our national history. The collection in Statuary Hall doesn't change very often, but actually since this lunch was held the last time, it's had several additions. Rosa Parks is now in Statuary Hall, and she is, of course, seated rather than standing, as she should be. When Mrs. Parks died in 2005, one of the few people who'd never held any public office or served in the military to lay to honor in the Capitol Rotunda, and several of us were there that day. Another addition, Norman Berglog, the leader of the Green Revolution, though this Green Revolution was about his great efforts to feed people, the demands in food production, and he was really a leader in that area. Talking to Governor Perdue last night about what's going to happen as world food demand doubles in 35 or 40 years and the great opportunity we have there. Barry Goldwater, a real inspiration to a generation of conservatives, was added to Statuary Hall over the last few years. And Thomas Edison of Ohio, who discovered more than 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb, and until he discovered the one way to make that light bulb. The painting in the middle of the room is from a great Missouri artist, George Caleb Bingham. He did 3 election series, the painting here, 3 painting
Missouri
series.
Senator Roy Blunt speaking to the crowd there as they prepare for their lunch, making note of the fact that there are a number of new statues in place at Statuary Hall there in the Capitol Rotunda since the last inauguration, pointing out Rosa Parks, an icon of the civil rights movement, her statue there. And of course, Roy, you were talking about Nancy Pelosi. She's there, but a number of Democratic lawmakers are not taking part, boycotting the event, including John Lewis, civil rights icon.
That's right, and that's drawing some criticism for their actions. Others saying they don't want to normalize what's happening here. And what I was trying to say earlier was Nancy Pelosi and other lawmakers who did attend decided to wear a pin that said "Protect Our Care," a hashtag that they're using to protect one of Obama's leading legacies from his presidency, which was the Affordable Health Care Act, or Obamacare has been known, which Republicans have vowed to repeal. And interestingly enough, I spoke to one White House official who told me that several of them are scrambling to try to get health care before that's repealed, now that they're out of jobs. From that luncheon, Donald Trump and his wife Melania and the Pences will travel to the White House. We have a map of that route if we can show it to you. It's about a 2-kilometer journey that starts since he won, before taking office, of how he would deal with his business interests and business conflicts. A stark reminder of the Trump Hotel as they pass along it. And we'll, of course, be waiting to see if Trump and Melania, President Trump and his wife Melania, the First Lady, will get out of the motorcade and walk along the way. Lots of security here lined up, waiting for this parade to start in just about a little over an hour's time, and security on hand from some 30,000 security personnel from dozens of agencies waiting for this parade to start, a historic moment here in Washington, D.C. Mike, back to you.
Rowie, thanks so much. We're looking at the plane that will carry Barack Obama and Michelle Obama to Palm Springs, California. It's preparing to take off now. This is at Andrews, not a very far distance from the Capitol itself. You can see the camera. There's still, it looks as though there's still some rain. In fact, we just lost the shot. Sarah Gupta was here. We interrupted your train of thought. I'd like to pick up on that. You were saying.
Yes, what I was saying is that it was the United States, through its own power and resolution and sense of purpose, which was able to create this Asian operating system built on open trade, secure sea lanes, and stable politics. It should not be 70 years later, after it had been set up by Harry Truman and those great presidents at that point of time, that it is Donald Trump who has emerged from a surprise, come from behind victory of the magnitude of Truman himself in 1948, to be surrendering, so frivolously forfeiting that patent to the intellectual property of that Asian operating system, which the US so laboriously constructed and managed.
I want to continue this discussion, but I also want to bring in Will Denslow, who's in Moscow, because certainly Russia has played a role in this election. There's been a lot of talk about Russia's role in the election. Of course, Vladimir Putin denying that Russia took part in this at all. But there's also this discussion about a warming. The Trump administration definitely looking for a warming in relations between the United States and Russia. I want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's clearly the message from the Kremlin here in Moscow. A great deal of optimism as President Trump sworn into office. Of course, for months, there's really been seen this warming relationship, some incredibly strong and positive words coming from both the Kremlin and from the Trump camp. Of course, the message from the Kremlin is, of course, they remain adamant that both Donald Trump and the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, have not had any contact in the past, contrary to this unverified dossier that was released a few days ago. The message from the Kremlin is, though, there is a huge hope that both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump can get on, and that can have real implications in terms of finally improving US-Russian relations. Of course, Russia's foreign ministry in recent days have described this relationship as a crisis point, and the message really resonating with Russian people here on the streets in Moscow, that things finally can get better between these two former Cold War foes. The hope is that under a Trump administration, we could even see a lifting of Russian sanctions, even the that's certainly Moscow.
And also, there's also been talk of late, and maybe you can discuss this as well, about Russia extending an invitation for the U.S. to also take part in these talks with regards to Syria.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Message from the Kremlin, message from the Foreign Ministry this week, very much welcoming the Trump administration to take part in these talks. Of course, this is really the first major talks without U.S. major backing and getting them off the ground. Of course, in just a couple days' time in Astana in Kazakhstan, Turkey and Russia leading the way in getting these talks off the ground. But the message again from Russia's foreign ministry, they want the Trump administration, certainly at the expert level, to be a part of it. Of course, under the Obama administration, we saw Russia and the United States very much at loggerheads, of course, supporting opposing sides in the Syria.
Here in Washington, D.C., we've seen protests very early this morning, some of them violent, people throwing trash cans through windows and that sort of thing. Let's check in with Jim Spellman, who's been keeping his finger on the pulse of these protests. What can you tell us, Jim?
Well, Mike, those violent protests seem to be quite localized. We've seen thousands of protesters amongst the crowd of Donald Trump's supporters here along the parade route, as well as focused on some of the security access points. They wanted to focus their protests there, knowing that all the Trump supporters going to the festivities would have to pass through those portals. That way they could get their message out. And getting their message out is becoming ever more important for these people. We have some people here. You can see live pictures of protesters here in Washington, D.C. Along the parade route, one of the things that people want is the opportunity to get the new president, Donald Trump, to see their signs, to hear their things. We are also protests happening around the country at this point, as well as here in Washington, D.C. Speaking to protesters here, they feel that as Donald Trump begins his term as president, it's all the more important that they make their voices heard. So even though you see clashes like these with the police with pepper spray. Protesters we're speaking here, by and large, have been peaceful, and they want their message heard. Listen to one of the protesters we spoke to earlier this morning.
That's the time to stand up, not after it's too late to do anything, but as they're making plans or it's in motion toward that kind of activity. So now more than ever on a day like today.
Here along the parade route, we've seen more and more protesters come in, as well as more Donald Trump supporters getting ready to unfurl their signs. This is right behind us is Donald Trump's hotel. They feel like this is a focal point of this parade route, Mike.
Well, let's go back to some of these live pictures of the protest, and I want to kind of walk through this, Jim, because I know you've been covering the preparation for this in the last couple of days. We've been seeing people getting pepper spray. We see this man dropping to the ground. Obviously, they're going to be pouring water in his eyes. The sting from that, indescribable. But we're seeing a lot of pepper spray being used. It looks as though somebody there just throwing a brick. The police were prepared for this, though, weren't they? Talk to me about what they were concerned about. They were in place. There's an awful lot of them there, aren't there?
Sure. If you start with the area where Donald Trump and the other dignitaries are and work your way out, you have incredibly tight security. And then you have the security for most of the people coming here. To get to these areas along the parade route, you have to go through intensive security, not unlike what you go through at an airport. Metal detectors, pat-downs, etc. So what they want to do is be sure they keep anything like this conflict that we're seeing here in these violent altercations with police far away from any of the dignitaries, and honestly far away from cameras like this as well. So the police feel that even if there are clashes like this, it's a success because those clashes did not happen close to the dignitaries, close to the VIPs, Mike.
You know, the other thing you were talking about, Jim, when we were talking to you, and again, we're seeing a lot more activity here, the police moving in, a lot of pepper spray. They've been using these smoke bombs to try and disperse the crowd. You see the barriers there as they start to move forward. I've seen this sort of thing before where it's basically like riot police. They move forward as a phalanx and move against the crowd and try and disperse them. But obviously it looks as though this is getting a little bit more unruly. You would also talk to them about some of their other concerns, drones, cyber. Walk us through that.
Sure, so when police can see something like somebody throwing a brick, this type of thing, that's something they can deal with. They have tools and experience, especially in a place like Washington, D.C., to handle something like that. Concerns that are newer this year versus past inaugurations are things not so easy to see. Cyber attacks, things like you can see here in this video, as well as things you can't see at all, Mike.
And this is K Street, not far from where we're at, also not very far from the White House itself. And as we know, the president and his family will be at the reviewing stand on Pennsylvania Avenue watching the parade go by. So undoubtedly, they'll be aware that this is going on. Former President George Bush talked about in one of his memoirs how he couldn't hear the people and what they were saying, but he could certainly see some of the fingers being held up. People not very happy with him. He was the last president to go through much what Donald Trump is going through, where he lost the popular vote, but won the Electoral College.
Yeah, so there are many protesters here that are along the parade route, and the reviewing stands are just
away from the reviewing stand. It's very likely the incoming president will not see any of this, but he'll clearly know about it. He's very on top of these things. Sean Caleb's, your thoughts? We did see some protests back in 2001 when George W. Bush was inaugurated. In fact, some people ushered out from the crowd because of their protests. But the intensity today, pretty intense.
Without question, and it's they protest for a variety of reasons. If you remember back in 2000, it was a race that went on and on and on, and a lot of people thought that it was handled improperly, and George Bush shouldn't have been declared the victor. But here, something much deeper, the division in this nation, the polarization. Authorities were prepared for something like this. They knew that there would be demonstrations. They've apparently kept the violence to a minimum. There are literally scores of agencies, state, federal, within the district, all these authorities coming together. I walked from my house to the Capitol this morning, and about 4 blocks from the Capitol, I ran into the first troops who were manning the streets, and then when I got about 2 blocks from the Capitol, it was completely locked down. So security has been a top priority. Certainly they want to allow people to vent, to release their frustration. If they tried to keep a complete lid on it, that could only make the situation much worse. But as you said, they're trying to keep them away from where either the new president would see them, but perhaps more so to keep them away from the legions of people who came from all over the United States to watch Donald Trump be sworn into office. These are people who feel very strongly in support of Trump. And let's remember, whatever people may think of the speech, he reached out to a lot of people in the United States who are hurting, who have lost jobs, a middle class that is going away. So the people who are protesting now clearly see something entirely different, and so they're trying to do everything they can to allow these groups to chant, to scream, to have a megaphone, to hold up their signs. But when it crosses the line, as Jim Spellman talked about, when people throw bricks or even something even more heinous that authorities can't see, then of course, Mike, it becomes a much bigger concern.
Yeah, and really quite a contrast we're looking at here in Washington, D.C., this transfer of power going ever so smoothly. We're seeing an elegant lunch taking place in another part of Washington, D.C., not very far from the Capitol itself. You're seeing what we're seeing right now, police officers marching and trying to disperse this crowd. Tear gas, we're seeing these smoke grenades thrown, which is causing a great deal of smoke. It makes a bang noise. It's not a shot of any kind. This is all an effort to disperse this crowd that mobilized today. And again, we've watched a couple of these occur. Earlier today, I was talking to Daniel Wrenches, not far from our studios, probably about a couple blocks away, people throwing things through windows in a McDonald's, a bank, a Starbucks. The intensity, as I said, it is considerable, and it again indicates what Donald Trump inherits as president of the United States, a divided country. He comes in with a very low approval rating. Sean?
He comes in with a low approval rating. You're exactly right, but you know, it's not just that he inherits it. I think that a lot of people around the United States, indeed globally, would say that he helped foster this. He really took a very harsh tone all through the campaign. First, attacking members within his own party, tearing them down, not just with the political discussion, the normal discourse that one hears, no matter how much the mud gets tossed around. But he went completely personal, attacking a lot of his opponents, calling former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton lying, or crooked Hillary, Mario Rubio, Little Mario. I mean, these are personal attacks, and this is what the United States political system really kind of devolved into during this last campaign. There are a lot of people who are upset. The country became more divided. As I mentioned to you earlier, in going around and doing a series of reports on the divided United States, it was easy to get people to talk about this, to talk about how they feel, that Donald Trump is reaching out simply to one class of citizen within the United States. And while he had a chance today to a speech to perhaps offer an olive branch or try to say something to unify the nation, I think a lot of people are going to look back at this address that he gave here on the steps of the Capitol, and they aren't going to see that. So this frustration that you see boiling over, I don't see there's any indication that it's going to dampen anytime in the near future. I can only imagine what people are going to do, and just the whole juxtaposition of this one elegant lunch going on at the Capitol, and then about 2 kilometers away, people just descending into violence, people simply furious with the system and the results that came from it.
Yes. Sean, thanks so much. Eleanor Clift is here on the set with us. This great divide, we're witnessing it here in Washington, D.C. We have a president who took the oath of office today with an approval rating right around 40%. Really made no efforts to reach out to the other 60% in his speech. And it appears they got the message. We're seeing a lot of activity out there on the streets. We're expecting even more tomorrow.
Yeah. You know, I don't really know what Donald Trump could have said that would alleviate this, and I'm not sure the people who dressed all in white, which is kind of the color of the suffrage movement, and if you look at the people who are demonstrating, these are young people, they're minorities, they're women, and if you look at the people who were assembled mostly for the inauguration, and if you look at his cabinet, mostly white, and status quo, the kind of Washington that allegedly the voters wanted to overturn. So
well,
I
and
thought
clearly the people here that we're watching here would be the ones saying there's income inequality in this country. It needs to end. He's not sending any message about that.
His economic message is we're going to restore the America where once upon a time you could have a good middle-class job working in a factory. That's an America that's never going to come back. So I don't see how he fulfills, do not seem to be the kind of people who are necessarily going to carry out this broad vision that he has enunciated. It feels like it's all pretty fanciful, and you wonder if Donald Trump has ever really sat down and thought through any of his policies. If he can bring this off, he truly is a magician. But I think it's going to be very difficult.
It's going to be an interesting day. It's the top of the hour. Our coverage continues.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States
the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability,
Donald Trump, the new President of the United States, sworn in by Justice John Roberts, hugging his family. And the transfer of power has occurred. There you see him shaking hands in our own studios. And we've been watching this throughout. We saw it very early in the day, the break-ups.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you listen to what Donald Trump said in his speech today, he talked about this is a time that we're going to take back power. We're going to give it back to the people. And then he went and sat down at lunch with a lot of very wealthy people while a lot of very spectrum are out demonstrating in the streets. I didn't mean to imply earlier, as Eleanor said, that Donald Trump could say some accusation that has happened, but he had the opportunity to say something that at least he was willing to reach out and try to talk to the other side, and that simply didn't happen. Here in Washington, D.C., he is going to be living in a city where roughly, I think, 4% of the people in the city voted for him for president, so he's living in a city where he's going to have a pretty hostile reaction every time he goes out. There are so many things that one can really point at. The deal that allowed him to renovate the hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue, in which the parade will go by, that certainly is a flashpoint for a lot of concern. Indeed, this is a city that there is a certain degree of public assistance, and that's something that Donald Trump, many Republicans have sought to attack. You heard him say it again today. We're going to put people back to work. We're going to get them off the welfare system. Well, it's not as simple as that. You know, this is a many-layered problem, and simply by saying we're going to put America back, get people back in the coal mines, fire up the steel mills once again. These are industries that have moved on for a variety of reasons. It's not that you can just say the jobs went overseas and it's that simple. And unless he's going to take a very how this nation got here and try to find a way to bridge this gap, you're going to see a lot more of these demonstrations, not just here in
Electoral college vote, but almost lost by 3 million votes in the popular vote to Hillary Clinton. Let's check in with Jessica Stone, the change in power, change in leadership, and a change in the website.
That's right. Looking through the new whitehouse.gov presidential website, I'm seeing a lot of the same writings from the donaldtrump.com and greatagain.gov websites, and specifically a big change in tone around climate change. You won't see a specific agenda devoted to fighting climate change under this president, but you will see under America First energy plan, him rolling back a lot of the climate effective proposals of the Obama administration and attempts to make good on things like the Green Climate reached a couple of years ago with Beijing. Beijing being a key partner in that effort. You know, we're seeing now a new commitment to reverse that. They'll try to do that as well. Some other things to note, an emphasis on rebuilding the military and adding millions of dollars back to that budget. Standing up for law enforcement community. You know, we've had such a troubled past couple of years in terms of race relations and police shootings in urban communities in particular, unarmed Black young men in particular being the victims of those crimes or those incidents. And in many cases now, we're going to see an administration that has an agenda item specifically devoted to standing up for police officers, for tightening law enforcement, and basically, as to quoting from the website now, our job is not to make life more comfortable for the rioter, the looter, or the violent disruptor. So a real law and order line there, Mike, and that's something that, of course, appeals to a lot of the vets, a lot of the military officers, and a lot of the law enforcement community that backed this president.
Jessica, thanks so much. Let's check in with Roy Rudenberg. I guess, Roy, we're hearing that some American networks are electing not to show these images.
Yeah, Mike, I was actually about to say that, but that just changed in the last 10 seconds, if you will. I'm actually here to give you an understanding of where I am at the museum, which is a museum dedicated to the spirit of journalism. It has the vantage point over Pennsylvania Avenue where the parade route is happening, and it is sort of a reminder of the confrontation that Donald Trump has had with the media over the last year, some good, some bad. He referred to outlets like CNN as fake news very recently in his press conference, and he and his supporters have often attacked liberal media. One of the things that's, I think, quite interesting is the moment Barack Obama took off on that Marine chopper here at the museum, they had a jumbo screen the entire morning. They were showing CNN, favorable to liberal, considered liberal media. The moment Barack Obama took off, the jumbo screen switched to Fox News, known for its support of Donald Trump, for support of Republicans, switched to Fox News, and that's all that's been showing. And just in the last minute, they have finally started showing pictures of the protests, which are happening just a few blocks away. And I think that contrast is quite interesting and perhaps helps explain to an international audience why there may be often two different realities in America. If much of red America, if it will, is not seeing the protests of blue America, they might not know about their frustrations. I also think that people in this blue America, if you will, who were listening to Donald Trump's speech, which was loaded with a lot of patriotic rhetoric, things that some people might say would be nationalist, and calls on promoting America over everything else, that may send a message that any sort of dissent won't be tolerated. When you have a candidate who suggests locking Hillary Clinton up, that's language that Donald Trump has now abandoned, but his supporters still use. When you have that kind of rhetoric suggesting that some who criticize America are actually un-American and they deserve perhaps to be punished, that creates a large divide. And what we're seeing, that divide is reflected in the media, which has really become quite partisan in recent years and likely won't change anytime soon under Donald Trump. There have been some suggestions that he'll rarely hold press conferences, that he might be hostile to the press corps that follows him at the White House. We saw him as president-elect right after the inauguration, abandoning his press corps on a couple of occasions already. So people will closely be watching to see what type of relations he will have with the media, which many Americans consider to be the unofficial fourth branch of government. Mike?
Roy, thanks so much. I want to get the viewpoint from outside the United States. Let's check back in with Victor Gao. You're watching the imagery. Your take?
I think the United States is still very much in a split situation, and President Donald Trump has failed in bringing unity back to the American people. And therefore, it is a very uncertain period involving the United States. And this also makes the whole rest of the world in a very uncertain period, because this weakens the global leadership of the United States. And in the current stage, as well as in the coming weeks or months, or even in the coming 4 years. Therefore, I think President Donald Trump needs to really work very hard to bring unity back to the United States and really get focused on getting the U.S. economy developed, rather than engaging in further actions which may further split up the American society.
We're watching these images again, this on K Street, and we're expecting the police to begin their march forward to try and clear this crowd. Eleanor Cliff is also here on the set with us watching this, and Eleanor, Donald Trump has said, I'm going to make America great again, kind of hearkening to the past. He's almost taking us back to the 1960s, isn't this? I mean, this is sort of what we saw in Chicago at the Democratic Convention.
Oh, it's very reminiscent of the era that gave us Richard Nixon, and also the segregationist governor George Wallace, who campaigned during that period. And a staple of their campaigns was always going against the mainstream media. They would point out the media behind the ropes and call them many of the same names that Donald Trump uses: dishonest, lying media. But the difference this time is that President Trump comes into the White House with a whole media infrastructure that he could call his own. There's the conservative media that has grown up and really taken root. Fox News, I thought that was really telling when your reporter said that the minute that Barack Obama left on the helicopter, that the newseum switched from following CNN to putting on Fox News. It's the allure of power. That's why you have a Congress which was almost universally opposed to candidate Trump on the Republican side, now apparently, willing to endorse virtually every one of his cabinet appointees and maybe allocate millions of dollars for infrastructure spending that Barack Obama would have loved to have gotten and they denied. And I'm all for that. But so I think there are going to be some areas where both sides can work together. But this is very reminiscent of the law and order period of the 1970s and 80s.
There's also this belief when presidents come into office that they have an agenda, that they're going to adhere to that agenda, they're going to push these issues forward. I remember talking to Condoleezza Rice at the Republican convention in Philadelphia back in 2000, and she was talking about how George W. Bush, he was going to have this relationship with Vicente Fox, that there was going to be this rich relationship between the U.S. and Mexico, and then 9/11 happened and that just went away. Even with Barack Obama, ISIL didn't occur, suddenly it springs up. He's got another issue on his plate. We're looking at these images. Donald Trump may have one agenda that he wants to handle, but there could be a number of other things that he's going to have to deal with that perhaps he wasn't prepared for, or perhaps he didn't anticipate. Talk to me about that.
Well, I think that's the challenge of the presidency, is you don't know what's around the corner, and there are many dangerous things lurking in the world. In President Trump's inaugural address, he said, we're going to defeat ISIL sort of once and for all and immediately, wipe them from the face of the earth. Well, how is he going to go about and do that? He hasn't really put in plans for any of his promises. And previous presidents, they do keep a list of their promises. They do take it seriously. And there are some here, he build a wall. He's going to have to do something on that and eliminate, repeal, and replace Obamacare. Maybe he can scale back on both of those. Maybe the wall becomes a fence. Maybe Obamacare gets changed somewhat and becomes Trump care. But there are some promises he will have to fulfill. And bringing jobs back to middle-class Americans who've watched their wages fall instead of rise over the last 20 years is, I think, his primary challenge.
That's right, and we're starting to see the police making their move. What they will do is they will walk down this street and they will just shove the people out of the way. You see the barriers that they have, and they will use the pepper spray, the smoke, to clear this crowd, and they are continuing their march. Sean, talk to us a little bit about the police tactics.
Yeah, it is a time-honored tradition we're seeing here. This is really the way that authorities have broken up disturbances, protests, demonstrations, whatever you want to call them, moving together as one unit. You see they have their shields in front of them. Usually there's somebody right on the person's backside kind of watching their 6 o'clock or what's going on behind them while also holding on their belt. And then they will move through. Typically, it's not uncommon to fire tear gas to try to get the crowd to disperse. And if you've ever been near one of those crowds and got a blast of that tear gas, it is amazing how debilitating it can be very quickly. It's happened to me on a handful of occasions, and one thing I learned early on is you do not want to get between the demonstrators or the police, because that's the clench point. That's where things get horrific. So either stand behind the police or stand behind the demonstrators. But you're also seeing some of the demonstrators appear to either sit down or kind of go in a begging position, as if to say, please, either let us demonstrate or do something or recognize our plea. But this is something that is going to go on. This has been very controlled, and the authorities clearly know that they are not under the global eyes right now, that there's so much attention on Washington, D.C. right now, so many live signals going out all around the world, CGTN, as a number of other networks. So they have a tough line to walk. They must do what they can to try and keep the peace and keep these demonstrations to a minimum, that they don't cause any kind of damage or destruction, but allow these people to vent, allow them to have their say. A democracy can be ugly, but this is the way it works. But when they cross the line, if they throw things at police, if they break windows, it can spiral out of control quickly, and certainly nobody involved in the middle of this wants this right now. And again, I'm just, completely, it's almost shocking to think that a couple of kilometers away, the new president is sitting with all the well-fed members of Congress eating, I'm sure, on silver spoons and forks and lovely china, and probably have little or no idea this is going on right now, unless aides are passing on information or they're checking social media, which of course is possible, but trying to pretend it is not happening. To have Trump wants to have his moment in the sun, if you will, taking the oath of office, enjoying the parade, but demonstrators doing everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen. Mike?
And I've lived in this city long enough to remember back in 2000, the anti-World Bank, IMF protest. Washington, D.C. police equipped for these sorts of things. They've dealt with this in the past. Interestingly enough, though, Eleanor, back then, they were protesting against globalization. There's a president now who's protesting against globalization, but
Right.
obviously a big divide there.
Right. Well, there are protests against globalization on the left and on the right, and that's maybe where we can find some common ground going ahead, and I think that's what Donald Trump is going to try to appeal to. But I must say, from watching the images on television, I can't tell, are we talking several hundred people? Are we talking thousands? I don't know that the numbers are that high. They're certainly getting a lot of attention, and that's the whole point of protests.
We can't tell. We've got several hundred police. We can at least say that.
Yeah,
we
yeah.
noticed that with them with their
And the
shields.
Washington, D.C. police are, as you point out, they do know how to handle protests. I don't think they've done anything yet that looks like they've gotten out of line.
Yes.
So that's good.
Sean?
Yeah, indeed, Mike. It's interesting to watch this, and a lot of it is basically boils down to what Donald Trump has said the last 18 months on the campaign trail. And we had a chance to listen to what he said today, and he wanted to reach out to his core supporters, talking about the loss of the middle class within the United States, how these jobs have gone away. He didn't use China by name, but he certainly talked about so many jobs going overseas. This is a bit of what he had to say during his inaugural address a short while ago.
We've made other countries rich from their homes and then redistributed all across the world. But that is the past. And now we are looking only to the future.
And as we've talked about throughout the day here, it's just not that simple. These jobs didn't go overseas because another country lured them for cheaper wages. So much of it has been because of modernization, computers, robotics. But this was a chance for Trump to reach out to his supporters. This is a chance for him to basically dictate what he's going to do in office over the next 4 years. He really wrapped himself in the American flag. A lot of his discussion was about God and country. And indeed, one of the items he signed today was to make a day of patriotism, which was certainly one of the cornerstones of his speech.
From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first. Every decision on trade, on taxes, on immigration, on foreign affairs will be made to benefit American workers and American families. We must protect our borders from the ravages of other countries, making our products, stealing our companies, and destroying our jobs.
He has talked a great deal about, of course, building the wall separating the United States and Mexico, and also at one point indicated that one of his first actions in office would be to label China a currency manipulator. Well, he has since backed off that a bit, of course, also because so many scholars, economists, and even the OPACE serving in Mexico only good for America, not talking about what's good for the global economy, not talking about what's good for globalization. All these things really work hand in hand.
Yeah, Sean Caleb's Life Force. I don't want to steal from Charles Dickens, but I will. It's a tale of two cities. We're watching this unfolding right now, protests here in Washington, D.C., not that far away. Politicians gathered, having a nice, sumptuous lunch, and interestingly enough, let's check in with Jessica Stone.
Well, and there's a real sense of dissonance as I watch these pictures. People watch the parade come to them as they are the leaders of that parade. We really have no sign of that protest violence where I am standing now. And even in a search of Twitter in terms of looking at what are politicians and what are people in the president's party and the president's administration saying about what's going on outside, it's not evident from what I'm seeing there that they are willing to weigh in or even are aware of exactly what's going on in other parts of the city.
It's fascinating to watch. Eleanor, one of the things that Donald Trump said in his speech that kind of caught my ear, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it, he said people will become the rulers of this nation again. You don't really hear the word ruler in the United States. You hear leader, you hear president. It was an odd word to choose, wasn't it?
Well, I think it's taking the populist fervor to the end stage. And when he talked about power to the people, I remember covering Al Gore in 2000, and power to the people was a phrase that they toyed with using, and I think Al Gore used it for a while. I think they decided it was too populist. But the whole message of Donald Trump is that he's overturning the elites in both parties, overturning all these structures in Washington, and somehow the people will storm the barricades and take over. It's great rhetoric, but how you make that happen is entirely another matter. And the people he has surrounded himself with, beginning with at the lunch today, but more importantly, the people he's putting in his cabinet, are really not inclined to do any of the things that he has set out broadly in his inaugural address and in his campaign.
People storming the barricades, but I'm not sure that these are the people he was thinking of when he's talking about that sort of thing. Let's check in with Victor Gao in Beijing as you watch this imagery, as you heard those words today. Give me your sense of where the United States and China go with their relationship. We're seeing so many conflicting messages from him. Peter Navarro, who's very anti-China as one of his aides and advisors. Terry Branstad, who is the former governor of Iowa, kind of a China hand, friend of President Xi Jinping. It just seems like all these convergence of messages. How do you read through all of it?
Well, first of all, I think today is a big day in the United States. This smooth transition of power from former President Obama to President Trump is a very vivid reflection of democracy in the United States, and President Donald Trump is inheriting all this division among the American people, and he needs to really get on top of that to bring unity back to the United States. Now, between China and the United States, in China, we do not have any hostility against the United States. We do not want to become enemies of the United States. The overwhelming majority of the Chinese people love the American people. We want to reach out to the United States. And I think if President Trump is serious about making America great again, then he should not disregard and exclude all the resources, capital, financial resources, and the ingenuity of the Chinese people. And we can actually help the United States achieve the goal of making America great again. However, that goal should be not at the cost of the world economy. And we now get very confused signals coming out of President Donald Trump and his inner circles, who will become the next government of the United States. We hope eventually there will be greater clarity in what exactly President Donald Trump wants to do, and we'll be better off with each other if we cooperate. And that's the highway to go between China and the United States. President Donald Trump should not divert the relations between China and the United States onto the route of hostility or confrontation. We hope for the best, even though we are prepared for the worst.
Victor Gao, that seems like a safe way of looking at things. Victor Gao joining us from Beijing. Let's get some final thoughts from Jessica Stone as we watch this imagery. Just a moment ago, it looked as though we may have had a couple of police officers who were hurt. We don't really have a number at this stage of how many people have been hurt in these protests. But Jessica, I want to get your final thoughts before we wrap up.
Well, earlier this week, Donald Trump tweeted what Franklin Graham, the Reverend, said via Twitter. He said it wasn't Donald Trump that divided this country. It was already divided. And whether or not you agree with his premise on that score, it's evident that even as his inauguration address has now been finished, he was speaking much more to supporters than detractors. He missed a chance to talk specifically to people who did not vote for him, women and minorities among them. And it remains to be seen if his policies can win anybody over in terms of achieving the unity that he did talk about in that speech. Mike?
Sean, President Trump, as Jessica just pointed out, not making any overtures to the people who were against him, but that really is not uncharacteristic. He really hasn't changed his tone or his tune.
He also has this tremendous ability to basically just stick to his message, even when facts point out it is completely wrong. He still acts as though what he's saying is completely right. I think it's going to be interesting once he does emerge from this luncheon and go down through the parade and sees these images later on throughout the day. Somehow, I'm sure he will just dismiss it as there wasn't anything going on, or it was such a small percentage that it shouldn't take away from everything else going on within the city today, which may or may not be wrong, but it's just the way Donald Trump looks at things.
Well, again, if we could just wrap up with your thoughts about his speech. It did seem as though it was a rather dark vision in the United States, talking about crime, gangs, rusted out factories. This kind of dovetails with this narrative that the U.S. is kind of messed up. I mean, this kind of plays to his message in a way, doesn't it?
Without question. And I think Eleanor really, again, touched on it as well, where he talks about reaching out to the common man, and yet many people in his cabinet are not just millionaires, they are billionaires. I think it'd be interesting to see the combined GDP of those people once they are all in the same room together. He is reaching out to this disenfranchised, dwindling middle class in the United States, but it is mostly white men, really, who he has reached out to. And if he really wants to unify this nation, it's not enough for his supporters to say, look, Barack Obama was really the divisive one in this nation. We're just trying to find a way to put the country back together. I think the images unfolding here in Washington, D.C., even on a lot of people, kind of show the pulse of this country now.
Yeah, he says he's going to be the law and order president. The law definitely in the streets of Washington, D.C. as we see this fire now taking place. Again, the police have positioned themselves trying to move these protesters out. No real clear idea. It looks as though hundreds of protesters. We don't really have a sense on the numbers. We do know tomorrow there's a big march planned here, a women's march planned in Washington, D.C. with thousands of people that will arrive here and protest against the President Trump and his administration. The parade route, though, is ready. It's in another part of the city, and Donald Trump will not be witnessing any of this as he makes his way to the parade route to watch from the viewing station right across from the White House. And then after watching the parade, of course, there'll be inaugural balls tonight, some of the pomp and pageantry. We'll have much more coverage at the top of the hour as we continue to trace the actions out there on the streets of Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for joining us today. More news later.